See, he threw her bag off the wagon before she even had a chance to speak. See, not set it down, not handed it back with an apology. See, threw it into the mud, in front of every soul standing on that platform. See, Horace Bellamy looked at Eliza Mercer the way a man looks at a horse he's decided isn't worth the feed. And then he said, loud enough for the whole crowd to hear, "You're no good to me." See, you'll be dead before January, 27 years old. See, alone, 1,200 miles from home, and the man who'd promised her a future just told a town full of strangers she wasn't worth keeping alive. See, if that had been you standing on that platform bag in the mud, face burning, nowhere to go, what would you have done? See, before we go any further, if stories like this speak to something in your heart, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss what's coming next. See, these are the stories about ordinary people who refuse to stay broken, and I want you here for every single one. See, drop your city or country in the comments right now. See, I want to see how far this story travels, and if it moves you, leave a like. It means more than you know. See now, let's go back to that platform, because what happened next changed everything. See, the morning Eliza Mercer arrived in Redstone Crossing, Montana Territory, the sky was the color of a bruise that hadn't finished forming. See, October 1884. The train had been running 4 hours behind schedule, which meant Eliza had spent most of the night sitting upright on a wooden bench in a car that smelled of tobacco and livestock. See, trying to keep her dress from wrinkling past saving and her nerves from doing the same. See, she hadn't slept. She'd been too busy rehearsing. Not the words exactly, she wasn't the kind of woman who scripted conversations and then read from the page. See, she'd been rehearsing the feeling she wanted to carry when she stepped off that train. See, steady, calm, like a woman who'd made a reasonable decision for reasonable reasons and had every right to be exactly where she was going. See, which was Redstone Crossing, population 400, give or take. See, end of a branch line. Beginning of something she hadn't fully let herself name yet. See, she'd answered the advertisement 3 months earlier. See, merchant seeks capable wife, correspondence welcome. See, passage provided for the right candidate. It wasn't romantic. See, she'd known that going in. Horace Bellamy had written 3 letters businesslike, non-kind, and Eliza had written 3 back. And somewhere in that exchange the terms had been understood if not spoken directly. See, he needed a woman who could run a household and present respectably to customers. And she needed to be somewhere that wasn't her sister's spare room in Boston, sleeping on a cot and pretending not to hear the arguments about money through the wall. See, it wasn't love. She wasn't naive enough to pretend it was. See, but it was a door. And Eliza Mercer had been standing in a hallway long enough. See, she stepped off the train carrying 1 bag leather, her mother's, worn at both handles, and she looked for a man matching the description Bellamy had written. See, medium height, dark coat. I'll be carrying a red handkerchief, so you'll know me. See, she spotted the handkerchief before she spotted the man, and then she spotted the man, and something in her chest made a small, quiet sound that she ignored. See, Horace Bellamy was not what she'd imagined. That wasn't the problem. She'd known better than to imagine too precisely. See, the problem was the way he looked at her, not with curiosity. See, not even with disappointment exactly. With the flat, transactional assessment of a man calculating whether a piece of furniture was worth the shipping cost. See, he looked her up and down once. That was all it took. See, you're smaller than I expected, he said. Not hello. See, not welcome, not even her name. Eliza kept her expression even. See, Eliza Mercer, she said, because someone had to observe the basic courtesies. See, Mr. Bellamy. Het didn't offer his hand. He was still looking at her like she was a problem he was trying to solve. See, the people on the platform, and there were people, a dozen at least, waiting for mail and packages, and the simple entertainment that a train's arrival provided in a town with limited options. None of them were pretending not to watch. See, they were watching openly. Eliza understood she was being evaluated by the entire audience simultaneously. See, she'd spent her whole life being evaluated. She knew how to stand still for it. See, how much do you weigh? Bellamy asked. She blinked. See, just once. I beg your pardon? It's a practical question. See, mountain winters are not forgiving to small women. See, I need someone who can carry 50 pounds of flour from the storeroom to the counter without losing half the morning to it. See, I need someone who isn't going to spend January sick in bed and February recovering. See, Eliza opened her mouth, closed it. She was trying to find the version of this response that didn't get her thrown back on the next train east with nothing to show for 3 months of correspondence and 1,200 miles of travel. See, she didn't find it fast enough. No, Bellamy said. See, just that. One word, the way you'd close a ledger. See, I'm sorry you made the trip. I'll reimburse your passage back to Boston. See, but I can't use you. Can't use you. The words landed somewhere behind her sternum and sat there. See, not because they hurt in the way love's rejection hurts. This was never love, but because of the specific cruelty of the phrasing. See, can't use you. Like she was a tool that had arrived with the wrong specifications. See, like the 3 months of letters and the weeks of preparation and the decision to leave everything she knew amounted to a defective shipment. See, she became aware, suddenly and completely, that her bag was still in her hand. See, and then it wasn't. Bellamy reached over and took it from her, just lifted it right out of her grip with the casual authority of a man who expected no resistance and set it down. See, no, that wasn't right. He dropped it. The bag hit the wet platform boards and tipped sideways into the mud at the platform's edge, and her mother's leather bag, the one she'd carried from Boston, lay on its side in the Montana dirt. See, the sound it made when it hit was small. Everything went very quiet around it. See, Eliza did not move. Later, she would not be able to explain fully what happened in those seconds. See, she'd felt many things she wasn't made of stone, but they arrived in an order she hadn't predicted. See, first came a flash of something so hot and clean, it was almost like relief, because now she knew exactly what kind of man she was dealing with, and uncertainty was finished. See, then came a cold, settled determination that had no drama in it whatsoever, just the simple weight of a woman deciding what she was going to do next. See, and somewhere underneath both of those things, so far down it barely registered, was a grief she couldn't afford to feel yet for the door she'd thought was opening and wasn't, for the plan that was already broken. See, for the cot at her sister's house she'd been so sure she was done with. See, she went and picked up the bag herself. She didn't wipe the mud off immediately. See, she just held it, standing straight, and she looked at Horace Bellamy with an expression that gave him nothing at all. See, your passage reimbursement, he said, and reached into his coat pocket. See, keep it, she said. She had $14 and some change in the bottom of that muddy bag. See, she did not know a single soul in Redstone Crossing. See, she had nowhere to stay and no plan, and the temperature was dropping, and she could feel the platform crowd watching her, the way crowds watch anything that might be about to collapse with that particular. See, hunger that is half sympathy and half entertainment. See, she walked to the end of the platform and sat down on a bench and opened her bag and took out her notebook and a pencil, and she began to write down what she had, what she needed, and what she could do. See, she was aware, in the peripheral way that a person is aware of weather, that she was being watched from further down the platform. See, not with the hungry crowd gaze, something quieter than that. See, she didn't look up. A man's boots came into her field of vision and stopped. See, she looked up. He was big, not in a showy way, but in the way of a man who had spent years doing physical work that didn't care whether he was tired or not. See, somewhere in his mid-30s, dark hair in need of cutting. See, a jaw that looked like it had been set and reset at some point, slightly off from where it had probably started. See, his coat was heavy wool, well made but not new, and there was sawdust worked into the fabric at the forearms in a way that no amount of brushing was ever going to fully fix. See, he'd been watching her since Bellamy walked away. She'd known without looking. See, you're not from here, he said. It wasn't a question. See, no, she said, Boston. She looked at him more carefully. See the accent. And the way you're sitting, back straight like that. He said it without mockery. See, just observation. You got somewhere to go tonight? See, I'm working on that, she said. Right. He looked at her notebook, then back at her face, and something in his expression shifted in a way she couldn't read yet. See, I'm Silas Rourke. I run a timber operation 12 miles up the mountain. See, I've been looking for someone to manage the cabin and teach my children through winter. See, she waited. Previous arrangements didn't hold, he said. And the way he said it, careful, closed off, like a door with a latch on the inside, told her there was more to that sentence than he was offering. See, I've got twins, 6-year-old boy and a girl. They're not easy right now. See, why not, she asked. He looked at her steadily. Their mother died 14 months ago. See, silence between them. Not uncomfortable, more like a space that had been cleared for something real. See, I'm offering room, board, and wages. $60 for the winter, paid in full when the pass opens in spring. He paused. See, it's hard work. The mountain is not what you're used to. See, Eliza looked at her notebook. $14. No contacts in Redstone Crossing. See, one muddy bag. A train that didn't return east until Thursday. See, she thought about what she'd written to her sister before she left Boston. See, I'm not running away. I'm running toward. She'd believed it when she wrote it. See, she was trying to decide whether she still believed it now or whether she'd just been a fool. See, tell me about the children, she said. Something in Silas Rourke's face changed. See, not much, just enough. Owen's the boy. He doesn't talk much since. See, he used to. He was the loud one. He stopped. Started again. See, Clara's the girl. She had this laugh, big laugh for a little kid. You'd hear it from across the clearing. See, she doesn't laugh much anymore. He said it plainly, like a man reporting facts, but his voice had gone somewhere slightly rough at the end, and he didn't try to smooth it out. See, Eliza closed the notebook. I don't know anything about running a mountain cabin, she said. See, I should tell you that up front. I can sew, I can cook on a regular stove, I can teach. I taught my neighbor's children for 2 years in Boston. See, but I've never done anything like what you're describing. See, I know that, he said. You don't know what you'd be getting. See, lady, he said. And there was something almost dry in it, not quite humor, but close to it. I just watched you get your bag thrown in the mud in front of 40 people and then sit down and start making a plan. See, I've got a fair idea what I'd be getting. She looked at him for a long moment. See, really looked, not the quick assessment she'd been doing since he appeared, cataloging whether he was safe, whether this was legitimate, what the risks were. See, actually looked at the tiredness around his eyes. See, at the way he was holding the brim of his hat in both hands, just squeezing slightly, like a man who was trying to make himself stand still. See, he needed help. Not the way Bellamy had needed help, not help as an acquisition. See, he needed it the way a person needs help, when they're already doing everything they can and it isn't quite enough, and they know it. See, I want to be paid for the work, she said. Not as a favor. See, not as charity. Wages for work, clearly agreed. That's what I said. See, and I'm not the children's mother. I won't try to be. See, something moved across his face. Pain, quick and controlled. See, no, I wouldn't ask that. Then I'll come. She stood up, picked up her muddy bag, and looked at him. See, he was looking back at her with an expression she wouldn't fully understand until much later, not relief, not quite. See, something more complicated. Like a man who had just done something that scared him and wasn't sure yet if it was brave or foolish. See, wagons this way, he said. She followed him off the platform, past the crowd that was still watching, past Horace Bellamy's store, where she could see him through the window, pulling his red handkerchief from his pocket. See, past the end of the street and out toward the road that wound up into the mountains. See, she did not look back. Not because she wasn't afraid. See, she was. See, her hands were shaking slightly inside her gloves, and she could feel her heart beating in her ears, and she was acutely, completely aware that she was about to ride 12 miles into wilderness with a man she had known for approximately 9 minutes. See, but she kept walking. Because Horace Bellamy had looked at her and seen the end of something. See, and Silas Rourke had looked at her and seen a beginning. See, and Eliza Mercer, 27 years old, one muddy bag and $14 and a notebook full of plans, had spent enough of her life being seen as the end of things. See, she climbed up onto the wagon seat. Silas clicked to the horses. See, the town of Redstone Crossing fell away behind them as the road began to climb. See, and somewhere up ahead, in a cabin 12 miles above the world she knew, 2 children who had stopped laughing were waiting without knowing yet that something was about to change. See, Eliza didn't know it either, not for certain. See, but she held her notebook against her chest like something that mattered and watched the mountain rise up around her. And for the first time since she'd stepped off that train, the cold felt less like danger and more like weather. See, just weather. Something to be managed. She was good at managing. See, the road up to Silas Rourke's timber operation was not a road in any sense Eliza recognized from Boston. See, it was a scar, a wound cut into the mountain's side by wagon wheels and necessity and sheer human stubbornness, and it switchbacked up through pine stands so dense the afternoon light came through them in pieces rather than whole. See, the wagon lurched and groaned over exposed root and frozen rut, and Eliza held the seat rail with both hands and said nothing. See, because there was nothing useful to say, and because she was spending most of her concentration on not sliding sideways into Silas Rourke's shoulder every time the left wheel dropped into a depression. See, he didn't talk much. She'd already understood that about him, from the platform. He was a man who chose his words the way you choose footing on uncertain ground, deliberately, one at a time. See, he told her once to watch her head when they passed under a low branch, and once he pulled the horses up short to let a small deer cross ahead of them, and that was the sum total of his conversation for the first hour. See, she found she didn't mind. She was busy watching the mountain. See, not admiring it, she wasn't in the mood for admiration, and she was too cold for it anyway, the temperature dropping steadily as they climbed. See, she was studying it, the way the timber stood, the way the wind moved through it differently at different elevations. See, the way the track they were following had been used enough to be worn, but not enough to be reliable, with places where the edge crumbled and places where a summer slide had pushed rocks across the path that someone Silas, see, she assumed had moved to the side but not fully cleared. See, 12 miles. A long way, in a mountain winter, from a town of 400 people and a railway line. See, she thought about that, and she thought about the $14 in her bag, and she thought about the notebook she'd been writing in on the platform. See, and she thought about Horace Bellamy's face when he told her she wasn't worth keeping alive through January. See, she was still thinking about that when Silas said, without looking at her, "You're doing the math." See, she turned her head. "Pardon? In your head, you're calculating whether this was a mistake." He kept his eyes on the track. See, most people, by this point in the ride, have started asking me to turn around. See, how many people have made this trip? A pause. Few. See, how many stayed? Another pause, longer. You'll be the first through a full winter if you do. See, that was information she probably should have had before she climbed on the wagon. See, she filed it away without comment. "What happened to the others?" she asked. See, first one lasted 6 weeks. Said the children were unmanageable. He said it flatly, no editorial in his voice, but something tightened around his eyes. See, second one made it to December. Said the isolation was too much. See, and the third. He glanced at her sideways. There wasn't a third. See, I stopped asking after 2. So what made you ask again? See, the horses rounded a bend, and for a moment the trees opened up on the left side, and there was a view vast and severe and genuinely breathtaking in the specific way that things are breathtaking when they could also kill you. See, and then the pines closed again and it was gone. See, I didn't plan to, he said finally. I came down for supplies. See, I wasn't looking for anyone. He paused. Then I saw Bellamy drop your bag. See, she said nothing. And then I watched you pick it up, he said. See, she still said nothing, but something in her chest did a thing she didn't have a name for. See, they rode the rest of the way up in silence, and Eliza sat with her muddy bag on her lap and watched the mountain move around her, and by the time the cabin came into view, she had finished her calculations. See, she had not concluded it was a mistake. She had concluded it was a risk, which was a different thing entirely. See, mistakes were avoidable in retrospect. Risks were just the price of moving forward. See, the cabin was bigger than she'd expected. 2 stories, solidly built, not beautiful. Nobody had wasted time on beautiful, but the logs were chinked tight, and the roof was steep enough to shed snow, and the chimney was stone and substantial. See, there was a barn to the left, a woodpile that ran along the entire south wall under an overhang, and a cleared area out front where a cart track ended and the mountain began again. See, standing in the doorway of the cabin, watching the wagon arrive, were 2 children. See, they stood very still, very close together, the girl slightly in front of the boy. See, which surprised Eliza. She'd somehow expected the reverse, and both of them with their arms at their sides, and their faces set in an expression she recognized immediately because she had worn it herself at various points in her life. See, it was the expression of people who are waiting to be disappointed. See, she climbed down from the wagon without waiting for assistance, not out of stubbornness. She simply didn't think to wait. See, she'd been climbing in and out of things unassisted her whole life, and she picked up her bag and walked toward the cabin and stopped a few feet in front of the children. See, you must be Clara and Owen, she said. Neither of them spoke. See, she didn't push it. She'd taught children. She knew that silence from a child was rarely about rudeness and usually about something else entirely. See, I'm Eliza, she said. I'll be staying through winter. See, I'm not here to change anything you don't want changed, and I'm not going to pretend we're family on the first day. See, that would be ridiculous. She looked at them both steadily. See, but I'd like to come inside if that's all right, because it's very cold out here. See, Owen looked at his boots. Clara looked at Eliza. Then Clara stepped aside and held the door. See, it was the smallest thing. It would have seemed like nothing to anyone watching. See, but Eliza understood exactly what it cost a grieving 6-year-old to do it, and she walked through that door with more care than she'd walked through any door in years. See, the inside of the cabin smelled like wood smoke and pine and something else underneath, a faint, sweet smell that might have been soap or might have been the memory of a woman's presence, something that hadn't quite faded. See, the main room had a big stone fireplace, a heavy oak table, shelves along one wall lined with provisions and tools and 2 books, and a stove in the corner that radiated enough heat to make the room survivable. See, it was not dirty, exactly, but it had the particular disorder of a space being managed by a person who is doing too much and sleeping too little, where things end up in approximately the right place, but not quite. See, she set her bag down and looked around, noting what she noted, and then she turned and found both children standing in the middle of the room, watching her with the focused intensity of animals determining whether something is safe. See, which one of you knows where the extra blankets are kept? She asked. See, Owen's eyes cut to a wooden chest along the far wall before he could stop himself. See, thank you, she said, without making anything of it. See, she went to the chest and opened it, and found the blankets heavy wool, well-made, a little musty, and she took one and brought it back to the fireplace and shook it out and hung it over the chair nearest the fire to air. See, and then she went to the stove and found a pot that still had the remnants of that morning's coffee in it, and she put it back on the heat without asking, because she needed something warm, and she suspected they did too. See, Clara watched all of this with an expression of intense private evaluation. See, Silas came in carrying her second bag. She hadn't realized she'd left it on the wagon, and he stopped when he saw her already moving around his kitchen, and for a moment something complicated moved across his face. See, I should show you where things are, he said. I'm finding them, she said, not unkindly. See, he set the bag down. He looked at his children, who were still watching Eliza with that focused animal attention. See, then he looked back at Eliza, and something in the set of his shoulders changed slightly, like a man who has been holding a door open against wind and just felt the wind shift. See, there's a room upstairs, he said. It's not large. See, I don't need large, she said. The first night was not easy. See, nobody pretended it was. Supper was beans and salt pork from what was on hand, which was fine. Eliza had eaten plainer, but she cooked it differently than Silas had been doing. See, adding an onion she found in the root cellar, and letting it all come together longer than whoever had made the last pot had bothered, and the smell changed the room in a way she hadn't planned but couldn't undo. See, she saw Owen's face when the smell reached him. Something crossed it, not happiness, the opposite of happiness, a grief triggered by something that used to mean comfort, and he turned his face away quickly toward the window. See, she pretended not to see. She put the food on the table and sat down and said nothing meaningful. See, Silas said nothing either. Clara ate with her spoon held too tightly. See, Owen ate nothing for the first 10 minutes, and then he ate everything on his plate. See, after supper, Eliza washed the dishes, and Silas put more wood on the fire, and the children sat at the table with a worn-out deck of cards that seemed to have about 40 of the 52 in it. See, and they played something between themselves with rules. Eliza didn't try to understand. See, she worked on mending a shirt she found with a torn sleeve. It was Owen's. She guessed by the size, and she listened to the mountain wind pick up outside, and she thought about Boston. See, briefly and without sentimentality, and then she stopped thinking about it. See, when she went upstairs to bed, Silas was sitting in the chair by the fire with his elbows on his knees, staring into the flames. See, he didn't look up. She didn't say goodnight. But at the top of the stairs, she paused for 1 second, and in that second, she heard him exhale long, slow, like a man releasing something he'd been holding since morning. See, she went to her room and closed the door and sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the dark for a while. See, then she opened her notebook and she started a new page. See, day 1 she wrote, cold, children wary, man exhausted. See, onion worked better than expected. She underlined onion. See, she wasn't sure why. The first week taught her more about the gap between what she'd imagined and what mountain life actually was than any amount of preparation could have. See, she'd expected physical difficulty. She'd gotten physical difficulty of a specific and relentless kind. She hadn't predicted not dramatic hardship, nothing cinematic. See, just the bone-deep grind of a life where everything took 3 times longer than it should have because everything was 12 miles from help and twice as heavy as she was used to, and required a skill she didn't yet have. See, the first morning she tried to bring wood in from the pile. She badly misjudged the weight of the load. She picked up and stumbled and caught herself on the doorframe and didn't fall. See, but the wood scattered and made a noise that brought Clara running from the kitchen with an expression of someone expecting catastrophe. See, I'm fine, Eliza said from the ground where she'd landed anyway, because she hadn't quite caught herself as well as she'd thought. See, Clara stood in the doorway looking at her. I dropped the wood, Eliza said, unnecessary and slightly stupid. See, I can see that, Clara said. Her voice was smaller than Eliza expected, carefully controlled. See, you have to stack it in your left arm first. Papa does it like that. See, the big pieces on the bottom. Eliza looked at her. See, will you show me? Clara hesitated. For a moment, the wall went back up. Eliza could practically see it, and then something in the 6-year-old decided something. See, and she came down off the step and showed Eliza how to stack the wood in her left arm with the bigger pieces along her forearm and the smaller ones balanced on top. See, they carried 3 loads between them. Clara didn't say anything else. See, but she didn't go back inside immediately either. See, she stayed near the woodpile for a few minutes, and when Eliza looked over, the girl was stacking a neat little tower of small branches on the chopping block, methodical, precise, like someone who needed to organize something she could control. See, your father taught you that? Eliza said carefully. See, Clara didn't look up. Mama did. The name dropped into the cold air, and neither of them knew what to do with it. See, Eliza didn't try to say anything comforting. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be wrong. See, she just nodded, like information had been offered and received, and she carried her wood inside. See, Owen was harder. Owen didn't teach her anything. Owen didn't speak to her at all for the first 4 days, not answering, not deliberately ignoring, just genuinely absent from any exchange that might have required connection. See, he was present physically and almost entirely unreachable otherwise. And Silas had warned her, but she hadn't understood until she was living it what it meant to have a child look through you like you were a pane of glass. See, she tried the direct approach first. On day 2, she sat across from him at the table and asked him what he liked to read. See, he looked at the table. What did you used to like? She tried. See, he looked at the table differently. She tried a different angle. See, what do you think about dogs? He looked up just for a second. See, we don't have a dog. I know. I'm asking what you think about them. See, a long pause. They're fine. Better than cats? Another pause slightly shorter. See, depends on the cat. She didn't push further. She took that small exchange and put it in her pocket and moved on to something else. And she didn't circle back to it that day because she understood instinctively. See, from years of watching children with her neighbors 5 in Boston, that some children will talk to you when they've decided you're safe and not 1 second before, and every attempt to accelerate that process only set it back. See, what she did instead was work. She worked constantly, visibly, and imperfectly. See, she asked Owen to help her bring in the water the first morning, because the bucket was genuinely too heavy for her on the icy path from the well. And she asked him for help the way you ask someone who knows the terrain, not helplessly, not cutely. See, but directly, I don't know this ground yet, and I'll fall. See, will you help me? He helped. The second morning she didn't ask. See, he just appeared behind her with his coat on when she went for the bucket. See, she said nothing about it. She just handed him the empty bucket. See, by day 5, Owen was helping with the morning water without being asked. See, and it had nothing to do with Eliza, and everything to do with a 6-year-old boy who needed somewhere to put the part of himself that used to be useful and had been sitting with nowhere to go since his mother died. See, Silas watched all of this from a careful distance. See, he was not an emotionally demonstrative man. See, Eliza had understood that on the platform and confirmed it in every interaction since he communicated through action, through the wood he brought in without being asked, through the coffee he left on the stove when he went out at dawn. See, through the way he repaired a loose step on the porch stairs 3 days after she nearly went through it and said nothing about it afterward. See, he was attentive in the way of a man who watches without seeming to, who adjusts without announcing he's adjusted. See, she respected that. She understood it. What she didn't yet understand was what it cost him. See, she found out on day 8. See, she'd been going through the provisions to understand what they had and what they'd need through winter, making her list with the kind of methodical thoroughness that was just who she was. And she'd opened the second shelf of the pantry and found, see, pushed to the back behind a row of canning jars, a small wooden box. See, nothing marked on it. She hadn't been snooping, she'd been inventorying, but she'd opened it without thinking, before realizing what she was looking at. See, letters. 6 or 7 of them, tied with a piece of blue ribbon that had faded to gray at the folds. See, and on top of them, a small tintype photograph woman, dark hair, good face, and around her a quality that even through the stiff formality of a posed photograph refused to be stilled. See, laughing with her eyes while her mouth stayed correctly still. See, the twins' mouths, both of them, staring up at Eliza from the photograph. See, she put the lid back on, exactly as she'd found it. See, pushed it exactly back to where it had been. She was standing at the pantry shelf with her notebook in her hand and her pencil in the other when she heard Silas come in from the yard. See, he came through to the kitchen and stopped when he saw her face. See, the box, she said. Not a question, he went very still. See, I wasn't looking for it, she said. I was doing the inventory. See, I closed it immediately. She held his gaze. I'm sorry. See, I should have asked before going through that shelf. See, he looked at the pantry, and then at her, and then at somewhere slightly past both of them. See, the jaw that had already been broken once tightened. See, it's fine, he said in the voice of a man for whom it was very specifically not fine, but who had no language for that in front of another person. See, her name was Margaret, he said then, which she hadn't asked, and he hadn't planned. She could tell the name came out like it had been held under pressure for a long time and had finally found a small gap to escape through. See, she sounds like she was remarkable, Eliza said carefully. See, she was stopped. Started again. She was better at this than me. See, all of it. She knew what to do with them. They were her. She was the reason he stopped again. See, something moved in his face like weather. I don't know how to do what she did. See, I don't know how to be both things at once. I'm good at the work. See, I can provide. But whatever it is that makes kids feel, whatever she did, I don't have it. See, I can't figure out how to. He stopped. His jaw clamped. See, he turned toward the window. Eliza said nothing for a moment. See, you have it, she said then. You're just doing it the only way you know, which is quietly and through action, and children don't always recognize that version. See, but it's there. He didn't turn around. Owen watches you every time you come in from the yard, she said. See, did you know that? He watches the door. Not anxious, just watching. See, waiting to know you're back. Silas turned from the window now. See, he looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite name, not raw, not quite. He was too controlled for raw, but something in the same territory as raw. See, somewhere nearby. I didn't know that, he said quietly. See, he does it every time. The fire crackled. Outside, the mountain wind leaned into the cabin walls in the easy, testing way it did in the afternoons. See, Silas looked at his hands. I don't know what I expected when I asked you to come. See, I didn't think past the immediate problem. He looked up. See, that wasn't fair to you. No, she agreed. But I came anyway, so we're both adjusting. See, he almost smiled. The corner of his mouth made a move toward it before something pulled it back. See, but she saw it. She made a note of it in her head, the way you note a small light in a dark room, not dramatic, not worth announcing. See, just there. The lessons were her responsibility, and she took them seriously. See, she'd told Silas on the platform she could teach, and she'd meant it. See, but teaching in a Boston sitting room with proper books, and a child whose parents had decided education mattered was very different from teaching two deeply reluctant 6-year-olds who had spent 14 months learning that the world was unreliable. See, and had concluded from that lesson that new things were best treated with suspicion. See, she did not set up lessons. She did not announce school hours or produce a primer with the ceremony of an institution. See, she cooked and she let Clara help, and while Clara was helping, she talked about measuring not arithmetic, just measuring. This much flour, that much salt. How do you know the difference? Let's figure it out together. See, she mended clothes and she let Owen hand her thread, and while he was handing her thread, she talked about why you doubled the thread for thick fabric and single for thin. See, which led to a conversation about what makes things strong versus what makes things flexible, and before Owen had decided whether to participate, he was already participating. See, reading was trickier. She found the 2 books on the shelf, a farmer's almanac and what appeared to be a collection of frontier legal statutes. See, which was a deeply unlikely combination, and told her something she filed away about whoever had originally stocked this cabin, and she did not present either of these as reading material for children. See, instead, she found a piece of brown paper from the provisions wrapping, and she wrote on it in large letters, and she stuck it on the pantry shelf next to the canning jars. See, she wrote sugar, salt, coffee, cornmeal, dried beans. See. That evening, Owen stood in front of the pantry shelf for 3 full minutes without appearing to be doing anything. See. The next morning he asked her, very carefully, and in the voice of someone who did not want the question to mean anything, "What does that one say?" See. He pointed to cornmeal. She told him. And then she said, "Do you want to know why it's spelled that way?" See, he shrugged. She explained it anyway. See, by the second week, see, there were labels on every jar. See, every shelf. See, every provision container in the pantry. See, Clara had added 3 new ones herself, in large, unsteady letters, including one on the wood box by the fireplace that read wood, which Eliza quietly corrected to wood the following morning, and Clara corrected back to wood that afternoon. See, and Eliza let it be because some battles are not about the battle. See, Silas found wood one evening and looked at it for a long moment. See, she spelled it wrong, he said. She spelled it her way, Eliza said. See, he looked at her. He looked at the label. He said nothing and went to bank the fire for the night. See, but the next morning the label said wood, and it was in Clara's handwriting, and Eliza had not touched it. See, she did not ask how that had happened. By the 3rd week, the temperature had dropped enough that going outside required real preparation, and Eliza's hands had begun to show it. See, not dramatically, she was not a woman who found drama in physical discomfort, but the knuckles cracked and bled slightly in the cold despite the gloves, and the skin around her palms had gone from city soft to something rougher and more honest. See, and when she gripped the axe handle, she had started splitting the smaller kindling herself. See, one of 17 things she was teaching herself to do with imperfect success. She could feel the blisters underneath the calluses that were just beginning to form. See, she didn't mention any of this. Silas noticed anyway. See, she was sitting by the fire one evening, after the children had gone to bed, writing in her notebook and flexing her right hand carefully, and she didn't hear him come up behind her until he set something on the table beside her. See, a tin. Small, brown, unlabeled, rendered lard and beeswax, he said. See, works better than anything you'd get at a general store. See, someone used to make it. He didn't finish the sentence. See, she picked up the tin and opened it. It smelled of beeswax and something faintly herbal she couldn't identify. See, thank you, she said. He went back to his chair. She worked the salve into her knuckles and kept writing, and the fire settled, and the wind pressed against the walls, and outside the mountain held them all without comment. See, she wrote, week 3, hands starting to go. Salve helps. See, Owen read 6 words off the shelf today without being asked. See, Clara spelled wood correctly and pretended she hadn't. See, Silas noticed my hands before I said anything. She paused. See, she wrote, this is becoming something. I am not yet sure what. See, she capped the tin and put it in her pocket and closed the notebook and sat for a while looking at the fire. And the feeling in the room was the particular quietness of a place where something is changing, but no one has said so out loud yet. See, because saying so would mean agreeing that it matters, and agreeing that it matters would mean the risk of losing it. And some things are too new and too real to survive being named too early. See, outside the mountain pressed against the cold. Inside, for the first time since they'd come up that road 3 weeks ago, nobody was dreading tomorrow. See, that was not a small thing. That was not a small thing at all. See, Parpert 3 Louis, viết đủ 6,500 từ liên kết liền mạch với các phần trước trong câu chuyện, phá hội thoại tạo thành một câu chuyện liền mạch khi ghép lại. See, mỗi phần liền mạch về phần trước không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện ở đầu phần mới. See, liên kết các phần của câu chuyện một cách liền mạch. See, sử dụng câu chuyện tiếp giữa các phần. Duy trì chủ đề, tránh ngắt quãng đột ngột, không sử dụng gạch đầu dòng hoặc tiêu đề phụ, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, Hoa Kỳ, giọng văn giàu cảm xúc. See, Kê Thiêu ngôi thứ 3, giữ độ kịch tính không viết lan man, nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hội thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương xào rời và cụm từ AI điển hình. See, viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI cố gắng nghĩ sang. See, có yếu tố con người, không miêu tả quả mượt mà và hoàn hảo. Kết thúc phần không giới thiệu phần sau câu chuyện không nhắc đến Chúa. See, Louis trả lời trong một tin nhắn không nhảy sang document, chỉ dẫn bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung chuyện. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh, hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí. See, không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật. See, không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. See, tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. See, lưu ý đặc biệt quan trọng. Nếu đạt đến giới hạn trả lời, không được dừng giữa câu, hãy viết nốt câu đó hoàn chỉnh không mở rộng nội dung. See, the notebook that had started as a practical inventory flower, salt, coffee, what needs replenishing, what can wait, had become something else by December. See, Eliza didn't notice the shift happening. That was the thing about gradual change. It didn't announce itself. See, one day you were making lists of provisions, and the next you were writing 3 paragraphs about the way Owen had looked at the fire that evening, the specific quality of his stillness. See, the way he'd been holding his breath without knowing it, while Silas read aloud from the almanac badly, haltingly, because Silas was not a reader by habit, and he stumbled over words and went back and reread sentences that hadn't come out right. See, and none of that mattered, because Owen sat there with every cell in his body aimed at his father's voice. See, she wrote that down, all of it. And then she wrote, I am not certain whether I am recording this because it matters to the household or because it matters to me. See, I have stopped being able to tell the difference. She closed the notebook and didn't open it again for 2 days, which told her more than anything she could have written in it. See, December arrived the way weather arrived on that ridge, not as a date on a calendar, but as a physical event, something you felt before you understood it. See, the temperature didn't drop gradually. It fell. See, 3 days into the month, the thermometer Silas had nailed to the porch post read things Eliza didn't have prior experience with, numbers that required her to think differently about what going outside meant, what exposed skin meant. See, what wind meant when it came off the upper peaks at that specific angle that funneled it straight through the clearing. See, she adjusted. She was getting better at adjusting. See, her hands had hardened into something she no longer recognized as her own hands, the knuckles still cracked in extreme cold. The beeswax tin now lived permanently in her apron pocket, but the palms were different now. See, capable in a way they hadn't been in October. And she could carry the full water bucket without compensation and split a reasonable amount of kindling before her arms gave out. And she no longer dropped the axe when it stuck in a knot. See, small things. She was learning to measure progress in small things. See, Owen had begun reading in earnest. See, not from a book, she still hadn't produced a proper reader, partly because they didn't have one, and partly because she'd decided the labels and the signs she kept posting around the cabin were doing something a formal primer couldn't. See, which was connecting reading to the actual material world of his actual life. See, he could read cornmeal and salt and kindling and dangerous. She'd written that one on a piece of wood she'd nailed above the reach of the fire tools. See, not for safety exactly, but because dangerous was a useful word, and he'd been fascinated by it. And one morning in the second week of December, she found him at the table with a piece of brown paper and a pencil, writing something with tremendous concentration. See, she didn't approach. She kept moving through the kitchen, doing the things that needed doing, and she waited. See, after a while he looked up. Is this right? He held up the paper. See, he'd written, Papa would today. She looked at it. She came over and looked at it properly. See, the letters were large and imperfect, and the spacing was uneven, and the word Papa had a backwards P in it. See, almost, she said. She sat down across from him. She didn't take the pencil. See, the P in Papa, it goes this way. She drew it in the air. See, the bump faces the right. He erased his P and redrew it. See, it was now marginally less backwards. Is Papa one word or two? He asked. See, one word. What about would? One word. What about today? See, one word. He looked at the sentence. They're all one word, he said, like this was a thing he'd just discovered about the world. See, most things are, she said. He nodded slowly, processing this with the gravity of a small philosopher. See, then he read the sentence back to her, carefully, pointing at each word. See, Papa cut wood today. He did, she said. Owen looked at the sentence for another moment. See, then he folded the paper once, very precisely, and put it in his shirt pocket. See, he didn't say anything about it. He didn't explain why he was keeping it. See, he just put it away and got up to help with breakfast. And Eliza let him, and she didn't say anything about the paper either. See, that evening she added to her notebook, Owen wrote his first sentence today. See, he put it in his pocket. I think he plans to give it to someone. See, I have a guess about who. She was right. She saw it 2 days later, the folded paper on Silas's workbench in the barn, placed exactly where Silas set his gloves when he came in. See, she didn't know if Silas had seen it. She didn't ask. See, Clara's progress was different. Clara had always been the one more likely to erupt rather than contain where Owen held things in until they calcified. Clara let things out sideways, in unexpected directions. See, she would be fine and then suddenly not fine, and the transitions had no visible trigger that Eliza could identify. See, which meant that living with Clara required a specific kind of alertness that was less about watching for signs and more about simply being present so that when the eruption came there was something solid nearby. See, the first time it happened with Eliza present, she'd been caught completely off guard. See, it was a Tuesday she'd started keeping track of days again, something she hadn't done in the first weeks, and Clara was helping her make bread, which had become one of their consistent shared activities. See, the thing that got Clara close enough to talk without making talking the point. See, she'd been fine. They'd been doing the kneading together, and Clara had been telling Eliza something involved about a bird she'd seen out the south window, and then mid-sentence, she stopped. See, just stopped. The color left her face in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. See, Clara, Eliza said carefully. Mama made bread on Tuesdays, Clara said. See, her voice was completely flat. Always Tuesdays. Eliza put down the dough. See, she'd let me put the flour on, Clara said. She'd lift me up to reach the shelf. See, I'm tall enough now. I didn't need. She stopped. See, her hands, still floury, curled into fists at her sides. See, I know, Eliza said. See, you don't know. See, Clara said. See, and it wasn't accusatory. See, just precise. See, you didn't know her. You're right, Eliza said. See, I didn't. Tell me something about her. The question landed strangely. See, Clara looked at her like she wasn't sure what was being asked. See, something true, Eliza said. Something you want someone else to know. See, a long silence. The bread dough sat between them, patient. See, she couldn't whistle, Clara said finally. She kept trying, and she couldn't do it. See, Papa could. Owen learned she never could a pause. See, she thought it was funny. She'd laugh when Papa did it because she couldn't. See, that's a good thing to know, Eliza said. Clara's face was doing something complicated and controlled, the way her father's face did complicated things and controlled them. See, the family resemblance in that moment was so complete it made Eliza's chest ache. See, I don't want to make bread today, Clara said. All right, Eliza said. See, we'll make it tomorrow. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and walked to the door and put on her coat and went outside, and Eliza watched her go and did not follow because Clara didn't need following. See, Clara needed a few minutes in the cold to pull herself back together, and that was a legitimate need, and not every grief required company. See, Eliza finished the bread herself. When Clara came back 20 minutes later, cheeks red and snow in her hair, she sat down at the table and picked up the pencil and started writing her alphabet the way Eliza had shown her. See, and she didn't say anything about any of it, and Eliza didn't either. See, that was the day something shifted in how Clara held herself around Eliza. See, not warmth exactly, it wasn't a simple thing but a recalibration. See, like a compass that had been slightly off and had just corrected by a degree or two. See, enough to matter. Enough that the needle pointed somewhere truer. See, Silas had seen none of this. See, he was working the timber stand every daylight hour now, banking against the weeks the weather would eventually make work impossible, and he came home exhausted in the late afternoon, smelling of sawdust and pine pitch and cold air. See, and he ate supper, and he talked to the children in the careful, formal way of a man who was trying and knew he was doing it imperfectly and kept going anyway. See, and after they were in bed, he sat by the fire, and sometimes fell asleep there, and sometimes managed to get to his own room before that happened. See, he was running on not enough. Eliza could see it, but there was nothing to be done about it directly. See, the work had to be done. Winter had no patience for anyone's exhaustion. See, so she did what she could in the area she controlled. She made sure there was always hot food and coffee when he came in. She kept the cabin running with as much efficiency as she could manage so that nothing additional landed on him. See, and she reported on the children, not as a teacher making a formal accounting, but the way you'd tell someone something you knew they'd want to know. See, Owen read the almanac entry about frost patterns today. She told him one evening. See, out loud, without being asked. Silas looked up from his coffee. See, did he? He explained it to Clara afterward. Got most of it right. See, a pause. He looked into his cup. He was always the one who his mother used to say he'd be a scholar or a lawyer, one or the other. His voice went somewhere careful. See, she'd have liked watching that. She'd have liked today then, Eliza said simply. See, Silas said nothing for a moment, then he said, yeah. See, she would have. They sat with that, the fire doing its work, the wind outside testing the eaves. See, then Silas said, not looking at her, you're good at this. See, better than you think you are. She was quiet for a beat. See, I drop things. I still can't get the axe out of a knot reliably. See, I burned the cornbread twice last week. I'm not talking about the axe, he said. See, she knew what he was talking about. I'm learning, she said. See, it was the most honest answer she had. He nodded. See, he didn't push it further. And she didn't explain further, and the conversation ended there, but the space where it had been felt different afterward, warmer at its edges, like a room after company has just left. See, the storm came on a Thursday. See, she knew it was coming before it arrived, because the horses knew, and the horses told anyone who paid attention, both of them restless and resistant, when Silas tried to bring them in the previous afternoon, pacing the paddock fence, ears working. See, she'd been watching from the kitchen window, and she'd gone out and said to Silas, how long does it take for a storm to come once the animals start acting like that? See, he'd looked at the horses, and then at the sky, and then at the distant line of peaks to the north. See, 8 hours, he said. Maybe 12. He looked at her. See, you notice that. I've been watching them, she said. See, they've been off since yesterday. He went back to the barn and reinforced the door latch and brought in extra feed and spent an additional hour on preparations she didn't fully understand, but noted. See, and she went back inside and added to the provisions near the stove and checked the woodpile count and made sure the extra blankets from the chest were accessible and not buried. And she did all of this without announcing what she was doing or why. See, because the preparations were just the preparations. See, the storm arrived at roughly 11 hours from when she'd first mentioned the horses. See, it didn't announce itself with increasing wind or preliminary snow. See, it came as a sound first, a low structural sound, like the mountain itself was adjusting its weight. And then the wind came and the snow came, and they arrived together, fully formed at absolute intensity. See, the way this particular range produced its worst weather, without negotiation. See, by morning the drift against the north wall was shoulder height on Silas. See, inside the cabin by morning, Clara was burning with fever. See, it hadn't come from nowhere, though it felt that way. See, looking back later, Eliza would identify the signs she'd filed away and not yet added together the slight flush in Clara's cheeks 2 days earlier that she'd attributed to cold air, the way the girl had eaten less at supper the night before. See, the quality of her sleep, which Eliza had heard through the floor as restless and interrupted. See, the pieces had been there. The picture they made together had not yet come clear. See, it came clear at 4 a.m. when Clara woke up crying. See, not sad crying, pain crying. See, the sound went through the cabin wall and through Eliza's sleep, and she was on her feet before she was fully awake. And she was in the children's room, with her hand on Clara's forehead, before she'd formed a complete thought. See, the heat coming off the child's skin was alarming. See, Owen, she said, keeping her voice completely, even because the worst thing she could do right now was let alarm become audible. See, go get your father. See, Owen was already sitting up, already watching his sister with eyes that had gone to a specific dark place. Eliza recognized the place children go when they've already lost someone, and they can see the shape of that loss starting to repeat. See, he'd gone white. Owen, she said again. Firmer, your father. See now. He went. She was already pulling Clara upright, feeling the rigidity in the small body, checking what she could check with no training beyond what experience and observation, and a deep, cold, functional competence could provide. See, fever was high. She'd felt fevers before. She'd been part of the neighborhood response to illness in her Boston street enough times to have a working sense of degrees. See, this was high. Not the highest she'd encountered, but high enough and climbing, and in a child this small in a cabin that was currently buried in a blizzard 12 miles from the nearest doctor. See, she was calculating before she heard Silas's feet on the stairs. See, he came through the doorway and stopped. He looked at Clara. See, and something in Silas Rourke that Eliza had never seen before, the control, the competence, the solid, unmoving quality that was as much a part of him as his jaw or his hands, simply was not there. See, he looked at his daughter burning in that bed, and he went somewhere inside himself that he couldn't come back from quickly, and she could see it happening, could see the wall his wife's death had built inside him, rising up to meet this moment. See, and she understood in a way she hadn't before how completely Clara's illness had just become something else to him. See, it had become the night he'd already lived through once and hadn't survived intact. See, Silas, she said. He didn't look at her. Sharper. See, he looked at her. I need you to hear me right now, she said. See, not the other thing, me. Can you do that? His jaw worked. See, something in his eyes was fighting. She has a high fever and we're going to bring it down, Eliza said. See, that is what is happening right now, not anything else. See, this specific thing tonight. Are you with me? A long second. See, the wind hit the cabin wall like it meant something personal. See, he came back. Not all the way, she could see the cost of it in the cords in his neck, but enough. See, what do you need? Cold water from the bucket by the door. See, bring it here. And more wood on the fire right now, not later. Now the room temperature needs to be controllable. See, he moved. That was the thing about giving Silas Rourke something concrete to do. He did it. See, he went for the water. He went for the wood. He moved through the cabin with the focused physicality of a man who could function when he had a task and was drowning without one. See, she turned back to Clara. Owen had come back into the room. See, he was standing in the corner. He'd put himself in the corner, out of the way. See, which broke something in her chest, because it meant he'd learned that putting himself out of the way was how you got to stay, and he was watching his sister with that dark, frozen expression. See, Owen, she said, come here. He came. Your job is to keep talking to her, she said. See, doesn't matter what you say, her name, what you did today. See, a story. Anything, your voice, understand? He looked at Clara. See, his throat worked. She can hear you, Eliza said. See, Even like this, she can hear you. Keep her here with your voice. See, can you do that? He sat down on the edge of the bed. See, he put his hand over Clara's. He said, in a voice so small and steady and brave that it nearly undid her, Clara. See, it's me, it's Owen. You're okay. I'm right here. She turned away and went to meet Silas at the door. See, they worked. There was no elegant way to describe it. See, it was a night of cold compresses and a body temperature that came down and then climbed again, and the specific anxiety of watching a child's breathing for the particular rhythm that told you things were wrong or less wrong. See, it was Silas going out into the blizzard she hadn't asked him to, and she didn't argue with him when he did, and coming back with something from the barn. See, a packet of dried herbs that turned out to be something Margaret had prepared and stored in an old tobacco tin. And the look on his face when he handed it to Eliza was a whole novel she didn't have time to read. See, she used the herbs. She didn't know exactly what they were. She could identify 2 of the 3 by smell, but she knew enough to make a tea that smelled medicinal and could be reduced to a compress. See, and she'd seen this approach used enough times to know it was worth trying. See, it wasn't miraculous. Nothing that night was miraculous. See, the fever came down by 2 degrees over the course of 3 hours. And then held, and Eliza had learned enough to know that holding was better than climbing, and that holding was where you worked from. See, Owen talked to his sister for 4 straight hours. See, he told her about the frost patterns from the almanac. See, he told her about a rabbit he'd seen at the edge of the tree line last week. See, he told her about the sentence he'd written on brown paper and where he'd put it, and that Papa had found it because he could tell. See, he told her he'd been thinking they should have a dog, and that he'd been planning to bring it up when the weather turned. See, he ran out of things and started over and told her the frost patterns again, slightly different this time, with additions. See, Silas sat on the other side of the bed and held Clara's other hand and said nothing. And Eliza understood that this was Silas's version of the same thing presence, physical and unmoving, the silent counterpart to Owen's voice. See, she worked through the night. She was not without fear. See, she wanted to be clear about that in the accounting she was doing internally. The way she always ran internal accountings during difficult things she was afraid. She was tracking the fear alongside everything else. See, and the fear was specifically the fear of failing these children who had barely learned to trust the world again, and who could not sustain another loss of this kind without something in them breaking that might not be fixable. See, she was afraid of that. She carried it with her through the night, and she didn't put it down, and she didn't let it drive. See, around 4 a.m, 2 hours after the worst of it, see, an hour before the temperature finally started to do what she needed it to do, she came out of the children's room for 10 minutes to get more water and to put more wood on the main fire and to stand alone in the main room for just a moment. See, she stood at the fireplace and she put her hands on the mantel and she let herself be exhausted for exactly the 60 seconds she could afford. See, then she went back in. At 5:15 in the morning, Clara's fever broke. See, it broke the way fevers break, not dramatically, not with any ceremony, just a gradual shift in the quality of the child's skin under Eliza's hand, the temperature moving from that dry, papery heat to something damper and more natural. See, Clara's breathing changed. The rigidity in her small body softened. See, she opened her eyes. They were glassy and tired and unfocused, and then they focused. See, Papa, she said. Right here, Silas said. His voice had done something she'd never heard his voice do before. See, it had gone completely unguarded, just 2 words, no armor at all. See, I'm cold, Clara said. I know, baby, he said, I've got you. See, Owen made a sound. It was not a cry exactly, and not a laugh exactly, and not anything Eliza had a word for. See, it was the sound of a child who had been holding something enormous for a very long time, and had just been allowed for 1 moment to put it down. See, he pressed his face into the blanket at the edge of the bed, and his shoulders shook once, twice, and then he was still. See, Silas reached over without looking away from Clara and put his hand on the back of Owen's head. See, that was all. Just his hand there, the weight of it. See, Owen went still under it. Eliza set down the compress she'd been holding and stepped back from the bed. See, she was giving them the space that was theirs. This moment did not belong to her, and she knew it. See, she went to the doorway. She stopped there, because her legs had suddenly decided they were finished with the night. See, she put her hand on the doorframe, and she stood there for a moment, looking at the fire through the main room, the light of it steady and orange and unremarkable. See, she heard Silas behind her. She turned. He was standing 2 feet away. See, in 14 months of grief and isolation, and a winter of being held together by his own stubbornness, and not much else, she had not seen him look like this. See, not broken, that wasn't right. He didn't look broken. See, he looked like a man who had just put something down that he'd been carrying at terrible personal cost for a very long time, and the putting down of it had left him both lighter and more exposed simultaneously. See, he looked at her. She looked at him. He started. See, I know, she said. When I first saw her, I thought, see, I know what you thought, she said. I know. He pressed his mouth together. See, the jaw moved. He looked at the floor between them. See, she's going to be fine, Eliza said. The fever broke clean. See, she needs rest and fluids and warm and quiet for several days, but she's going to be fine. See, he nodded. He kept nodding slightly longer than the nod required, which was the only external sign of what was happening inside him. See, you didn't, he stopped again. Restarted. When I came in that room tonight and saw her, I lost. See, you came back, she said. That's what matters. I called you back and you came back. See, that's not a small thing. He looked at her then, really looked, the kind of look that takes inventory. See, why he stopped. Something in his expression was working something out. See, why did you stay tonight? Why did you stay at all? See, through this, the winter, the children, all of it. He wasn't asking it the way you ask a question you already know the answer to. See, he was asking it the way you ask something you've been afraid to ask, because the answer might be more than you know how to receive. See, she was quiet for a moment. Because it mattered, she said finally. See, because they matter. She held his gaze. Because you looked at me on that platform and you saw something Bellamy didn't, and I decided that was worth betting on. See, the fire shifted. A log settled. Outside, the blizzard was still running full force against the cabin walls, the sound of it constant and indifferent, the mountain doing what the mountain did without reference to anyone inside. See, inside, Silas Rourke looked at Eliza Mercer in the gray pre-dawn of a night that had gone right where it could have gone completely wrong. See, and something in the air between them that had been building for weeks, without either of them naming it, was suddenly very present and very clear, and neither of them looked away from it. See, he didn't move toward her. She didn't move toward him. See, but something shifted. Not in the room was the same cold, cramped, smoke-smelled mountain cabin it had been all winter. See, something in the quality of the space between them. See, the specific distance between two people who have just discovered, together, in the worst possible circumstances, something about what the other one is made of. See, neither of them said anything else. After a moment, she turned back toward the children's room, because Clara needed checking again, and Owen needed to sleep, and there was still work to be done. See, but at the doorway she paused. See, and she said, see, without turning around, see, you should sleep, Silas. See, a few hours, I'll watch them, a beat. I'll be in the chair, he said. See, in their room. I know, she said. That's fine. See, she went in. He followed. Owen had fallen asleep sitting up, his head tipped against the wall, still holding Clara's hand loosely in his. See, Clara was breathing with the deep evenness of genuine sleep, not the labored effort of fever sleep. See, Silas settled into the chair in the corner, his chair, the one he'd clearly put there at some point specifically for nights like this. See, which told her something about the man that she filed away with the other things she'd been filing, and he put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands for a moment, and then he straightened up and looked at his children. See, Eliza took the other chair, the one from the writing table in the hallway that she'd brought in at some point during the night without noticing, and she sat down and picked up the compressed cloth and wrung it out in the basin and kept working. See, outside, the storm was arguing with the mountain about something permanent. See, inside, 4 people were breathing together in a small, warm room, and none of them were alone in the dark, and that was the whole truth of it. See, morning came gray and muffled and absolute with snow, the light through the small window, the particular white of a world buried and remade, And when it arrived, Eliza was still in her chair and still awake, and Clara was still sleeping. See? And Owen had slid down the wall in the night to end up with his head on the floor, and his hand still loosely connected to his sister's through the gap in the blanket. And Silas had fallen asleep in his chair after all, his head back, one arm hanging. See? The years on his face temporarily surrendered to unconsciousness, so that he looked, just for these hours, like a man who had not been carrying something impossible for a long time. See? She watched them all. She was very tired. She did not write in her notebook that morning. See? Some things she understood she was past writing down, because they had moved from the category of things to be recorded into the category of things that had simply become part of who she was. See? Threaded into her now in a way that documentation couldn't touch. See? She just sat in the gray morning light and listened to 3 people breathe, and the storm pressed against the cabin, and the cabin held. See? Clara recovered slowly, which was the right speed for recovering. See? There was no dramatic morning where she sat up bright-eyed and declared herself well. See? It was 3 days of sleep and broth, and the particular irritability of a sick child who is getting better and therefore has enough energy to be frustrated by her own weakness, but not enough to do anything about it. See? She complained that the broth had too much salt. She complained that Owen was breathing too loud. See? She told Eliza on the 2nd day that the compress was too cold, and then on the 3rd day that it wasn't cold enough. See? And Eliza absorbed all of it without comment because a complaining Clara was a Clara who was coming back, and that was the only thing that mattered. See? Owen hovered. He tried not to. Eliza could see him trying not to. See? Could see the effort of a 6-year-old boy attempting to give his sister space while being constitutionally unable to be more than 8 feet from her, and he managed it imperfectly, which was the correct way to manage it. See? He'd appear in the doorway on some pretext, looking for a boot or asking about something in the pantry, and then linger slightly longer than the pretext required. And Clara would say, "Owen, I can see you," without opening her eyes, and he'd leave. See? And then be back 12 minutes later with a different pretext. See? Eliza watched this and said nothing about it. Some things you don't interrupt. See? Silas was different after the fever night. Not different in ways that were easy to describe or that announced themselves. See? He was still quiet. He still communicated primarily through action. See? He still went out to the timber stand every morning, the weather permitted, and came back exhausted every evening. See? But there was a quality missing from him that had been there before, a particular kind of guardedness, the specific holding at distance that a man maintains when he has decided, for reasons of self-preservation, see, that he will be useful to the people around him, but not available to them. See, that distance was smaller now. She noticed it in small things first. See, he started eating supper at the table consistently, instead of sometimes standing at the kitchen counter with his bowl, because he'd come in late and didn't want to make the meal a thing. See, he started answering the children's questions with more than the minimum not long answers. That wasn't who he was, but answers that had a second sentence in them, a follow-up. See, an indication that he was tracking the conversation and not just clearing it. See, he'd started very occasionally, saying something at supper that was not in response to anything, just something he'd observed or thought during the day, offered into the general air of the table without requiring a specific recipient. See, he told them one evening that he'd found a hawk feather near the north tree line, perfect condition, and he didn't know why he was telling them this, he said, except that it was a good feather. See, Owen asked what kind of hawk. Silas said he didn't know for certain, but probably a red tail based on the coloring. See, Clara asked if he'd kept it. He produced it from his coat pocket. See, Clara held it with both hands and looked at it for a long time, turning it, and then she put it on the windowsill above the table and said it could live there. See, Silas looked at the feather on the windowsill and said nothing, but the corner of his mouth did the thing it occasionally did, the almost smile that arrived and retreated before anyone could make something of it. See, and Eliza was developing an entire internal taxonomy of Silas Rourke's almost smiles because they were more articulate than most people's full ones. See, she didn't write that in the notebook. She was aware that she wasn't writing certain things in the notebook anymore, and she was aware of what that meant, and she was not yet sure what to do with what it meant. See, January hardened into something more serious than December had been. See, the temperatures Eliza had thought of as severe in December turned out to have been moderate by the mountain's actual standards. See, January showed her the real thing, the kind of cold that made the air feel thick, that made the inside of your nose hurt the moment you stepped outside, that turned the moisture from your breath into ice crystals before it had traveled a foot. See, the horses didn't like going out in it, and she didn't blame the horses. See, the well froze twice and had to be dealt with. See, the gap in the north wall's chinking that Silas had been intending to address since November made itself impossible to ignore, and she mentioned it to him once, and he fixed it the next morning before she was awake. See, and she found the repair when she went to start the stove and ran her fingers along it, new and tight, and said nothing about it aloud. See, she kept the cabin. That was the phrase she'd come to use in her head, not managed, not maintained, kept. See, in the way you keep something that matters. See, she kept the fire going, and the food coming, and the children learning, and the small, daily order of things that transformed a shelter from a place where people survived into a place where people actually lived. See, she was better at it now than she'd been in October, measurably, practically better, and that competence was its own form of satisfaction. See, not because she needed to prove anything to anyone, but because she'd come from a city where her skills were seamstress skills, and the world out here had required entirely different skills, and she'd developed them. And that development was hers. See, hers alone. Nobody had given it to her. The lessons had evolved into something she hadn't planned. See, what had started as informal, embedded teaching, reading through labels, arithmetic through measuring, reasoning through daily problems, had become something that more closely resembled an actual school, except that no one called it that. See, Owen and Clara now sat at the table every morning for roughly 2 hours with whatever materials she'd assembled, which were creative by necessity: the farmer's almanac, the legal statutes, letters she wrote out herself in clear print. See, arithmetic problems built around actual numbers from the household's actual life. How many logs to last 3 days at current burn rate? How many cups of flour remained, and how many loaves that represented? See, Clara turned out to have a natural aptitude for numbers that surprised everyone, possibly including Clara. See, she'd been working through a division problem. Eliza had set straightforward, within her range, and she'd solved it and sat looking at it with an expression of slightly suspicious satisfaction. See, like she wasn't sure she trusted an answer that had come that easily. See, is that right, she asked. Eliza checked it. Yes. See, Clara looked at it more. How did I do that? You thought it through, Eliza said. See, one step at a time, but it went fast. That's what happens when you know how to think through something, Eliza said. See, the first time is slow. After that, it starts to have its own shape. See, Clara turned this over. Can I do a harder one? Eliza wrote her a harder one. See, Clara did it in less time than the first. She looked at Eliza with an expression that was the closest thing to pure, unguarded joy that Eliza had seen on the child's face since October. See, and Eliza felt something move in her chest that she'd stopped pretending was merely professional satisfaction. See, Owen, watching from across the table, said she's going to be one of those people who does numbers for money. See, an accountant, Eliza said. Or a banker, Owen said, with the authority of someone who'd recently read the legal statutes chapter on commercial lending. See, Clara looked at him. What's a banker? What followed was Owen's explanation of banking, which was approximately 40% accurate and 60% extrapolated from things he'd read or half understood. See, and Eliza let it run because the inaccuracies were less important than the fact that Owen was explaining something to his sister with confidence, and Clara was listening to him with the attention she rarely gave anything she hadn't chosen herself. See, and the two of them were inhabiting a world they were building together out of words and partial knowledge and the specific, irreplaceable intimacy of twins who had been each other's primary company through the worst year of their lives. See, she taught. They learned. And somewhere in the middle of that, the three of them became something she didn't have a clean word for. See, not family. Not yet. She was careful about that word. She'd been careful about it since the first day. It was a word with weight and obligation and history, and she wasn't going to pick it up casually. See, but something adjacent to family, something in the same territory. See, it was Owen who named it, accidentally, one afternoon in late January. See, he'd been telling her something about a problem he was working. He'd started bringing her math problems he'd made up himself, which was a development that had delighted her, and that she'd been careful not to overreact to, and he'd said, see, I was thinking about it at breakfast, and then I figured it out before you got up. See, before you got up. As though she was someone who got up in this cabin. See, as though her waking and her presence were simply part of the framework of the day, expected and accounted for, as natural as Silas coming in from the yard and the fire needing more wood. See, she had filed that one away carefully. See, she had not written it down, because writing it down would have meant looking at it directly, and looking at it directly meant deciding what she felt about it, and what she felt about it was something she was not ready to fully examine. See, February came, and with February came the first real trouble between her and Silas. See, it was not dramatic, the way the worst troubles rarely are. See, it started as a disagreement about something specific and revealed something larger underneath, and the larger thing was what made it difficult. See, she'd been in correspondence through the monthly mail run that one of the neighboring homesteaders did into Redstone Crossing when weather permitted with a woman named Mrs. See, Alderton, who lived on a homestead roughly 6 miles to the east and had 4 children between the ages of 5 and 10. See, Mrs. Alderton had written to ask if Eliza would consider taking the Alderton children on for lessons 2 days a week. See, noting that she'd heard from somewhere, she was vague about the source, that there was teaching happening at the Rourke place and her children hadn't had proper schooling in 2 years. See, Liza had written back that she'd consider it and would discuss it with Silas. See, she'd brought it to Silas on a Tuesday evening, after supper, when the children were occupied with their cards and the fire was in good shape and there was no immediate crisis requiring attention. See, she'd explained what Mrs. See, Alderton had asked and said she thought it was workable. The 6 miles was not nothing, but the Alderton homestead was on a route Silas occasionally used for the timber operation, and perhaps there was a schedule that could be arranged. See, Silas listened. He said nothing until she finished. See, then he said, no. She looked at him. No, it's February. See, the road to the Alderton place is unreliable after heavy snow. See, 6 miles in that weather is, I understand the road, she said. See, I've been on these roads since October. I'm not proposing to walk it alone. See, I'm proposing we figure out a practical arrangement. See, there isn't one, he said, not in February. March then. See, when the weather, Eliza. His voice was not harsh, but it was final, in the way of a man who has made a decision and is not interested in revisiting it. See, she felt something tighten in her chest, not quite anger. See, something adjacent to it that was also about something else. See, you're not saying no because of the road, she said. See, a pause. The road is a real concern. It is, she agreed. See, it's also not the whole reason. He looked at the fire. See, we have an arrangement. You're here for Owen and Clara. See, adding 4 more children changes what that is. It expands it, she said. See, those children my children needed something and I made sure they had it, he said. See, I can't be responsible for every child on this ridge. See, I'm not asking you to be responsible for them, she said. See, I'm asking you to consider whether the arrangement we have has room to. See, it doesn't. She stopped. The silence between them was different from their usual silences, which were comfortable, productive, full of the shared understanding of 2 people who'd learned each other's rhythms. See, this silence had an edge in it. All right, she said. See, her voice was even. She was very careful about her voice. See, she got up and went to her room. She did not write in her notebook that night. See, she lay on her narrow bed in the dark, and she looked at the ceiling, and she had a completely honest conversation with herself about what had just happened and what it meant. See, because she'd learned long ago that the things you didn't examine directly had a way of growing into shapes you didn't want. See, what she'd heard underneath Silas's no was not cruelty or indifference. See, she'd heard fear, a very specific fear, which was the fear of change, of the arrangement shifting, of the thing that was working barely, by effort and stubbornness, but working becoming something different that might not work at all. See, she understood that fear. She'd felt versions of it herself. See, What she didn't understand, or what she understood and resisted, was what the fear was actually protecting. See, because she was becoming certain, lying there in the February dark, with the mountain pressing the cold through the cabin walls, that what Silas Rourke was protecting himself from was not the disruption of a working arrangement. See, it was the thing the arrangement had become, quietly, without permission, over the course of a winter. See, he was protecting himself from her, from what she'd come to mean to him, which she could no longer pretend not to see, and which he was not apparently ready to stop protecting himself from. See, she was awake for a long time. In the morning, things were not resolved, but they were managed, which was sometimes the best available outcome. See, Silas was at the table when she came down, and Owen and Clara were eating, and he looked at her when she came in with an expression that was readable only because she'd spent 4 months learning to read him. See, he handed her the coffee. She took it. Owen looked between them once with the perceptive unease of a child who detects tension without understanding it, and then went back to his breakfast. See, Clara said, "I solved another hard problem this morning before you came down." See, "Show me after breakfast," Eliza said. The day moved forward. See, days had a way of doing that regardless of what the night before had been. See, 3 days later, Silas came in at midday unusual. He was never in at midday, and he stood in the kitchen doorway, and she looked up from the table where she'd been working with the children. See, the Alderton children, he said. She waited. In March. See, when the road's better. 2 days a week. He said it like a man delivering a verdict he'd arrived at through due process, careful and considered. See, we'd need to set up properly for it, more supplies, better materials. See, I'd need to know the schedule well in advance. She looked at him for a moment. See, that's reasonable, she said. He nodded. He went back outside. See, Owen looked at the door and then at Eliza. What was that about? See, a decision, she said. Owen appeared to weigh this. See, did you win? There wasn't a contest, she said. See, Owen looked unconvinced. Clara looked up from her numbers and said, she won, and then went back to her problem. See, Eliza did not smile. She was very deliberate about not smiling. See, she looked at the table and kept her expression entirely neutral and waited for the moment to pass. See, that evening, after the children were in bed, Silas came and stood near the fireplace while she was mending, which was the closest thing to seeking her company that he'd done voluntarily and without pretext. See, I thought about what you said, he said, not specifying which part. See, he didn't need to. So did I, she said. You were right that the road wasn't the whole reason. See, I know, she said, a pause. He sat down in his chair, the one across from hers, the arrangement that had become so established, she'd stopped thinking of them as separate chairs and had started thinking of them as a pair. See, I don't know how to do this, he said. Any of this. See, the part beyond the day-to-day. I know how to work the timber and keep the cabin standing and keep the children fed, and that's what I know. See, the rest of it is new, she said. See, yeah, he looked at his hands. I keep waiting for the part where I understand what I'm doing. See, where it stops feeling like I'm guessing. It doesn't stop, she said. See, you just get better at guessing. He looked at her. See, the fire did its amber work on his face. You're not afraid of much, he said. See, she almost laughed. I'm afraid of several things. See, like what? She thought about it honestly. Getting this wrong, she said. See, the children. Letting them trust me, and then being someone they needed to trust and not being enough of what they needed. She paused. See, that frightens me considerably. He was quiet for a moment. See, you're enough, he said. Then, like he'd said more than he intended, he looked back at the fire. See, she kept mending. The needle went in and out of the cloth, and the fire settled, and outside February wind moved around the cabin, testing its opinions, and neither of them said anything else for a while. See, and the silence was back to being the good kind, the kind that didn't need filling. See, March arrived, and with it the first signs of the snow beginning to do what snow eventually had to do, which was recede. See, not quickly, the mountain didn't release anything quickly, but in the specific, grudging way of a season that was ending whether it wanted to or not. See, the light changed first, a quality of angle that made the afternoon sun come through the cabin windows differently. See, And then the snow along the southern exposures started to develop that particular crystallized crust that meant the daytime temperatures were getting above freezing for a few hours. See, the pass wouldn't be fully open for weeks yet, but the direction of things had changed. See, Eliza felt it in a way she hadn't expected to. She'd been so focused on the winters, so completely absorbed in the day-to-day machinery of keeping things going, that she hadn't thought ahead to spring in any concrete way. See, spring had been a concept, not a date. Now it was becoming a date. See, her contract was through winter. That had been the agreement. See, room, board, wages. See, paid in full when the pass opened. See, she'd known this. She'd known it since October. It had not seemed complicated then. See, it seemed considerably more complicated now. She did not raise it. See, there was a cowardice in that which she acknowledged to herself, but she didn't raise it, because raising it would require discussing it, and discussing it would require knowing what she wanted the answer to be. See, and what she wanted the answer to be was something she'd been circling for weeks without landing on. The way you circle something you're not sure you're allowed to want. See, Silas raised it first. See, he came in one evening in mid-March smelling of the particular mud that appeared when the ground started thawing, and he washed his hands at the basin, and he stood with his back to her slightly longer than usual, and she understood, see, the way she'd come to understand his particular silences, that he was preparing to say something he'd been working up to. See, the children were in bed. The fire was low and comfortable. See, this was their hour, the hour after the children were down, and over the course of 5 months it had become the hour she trusted most, the one where things that were real got said. See, he sat down, he looked at the fire. The pass will be open in about 4 weeks, he said. See, I know, she said. I've got your wages. He said it carefully, like the words had weight he was monitoring. See, full amount. Had it set aside since January. She kept her hands on her mending. See, all right, a long pause. You could go back to Boston, he said. See, or you mentioned once, maybe a shop. Somewhere not somewhere easier than this. He said it to the fire, not to her, and his voice was doing something controlled and difficult. See, she understood what he was doing. She understood it completely, and it made something in her chest do something complicated because it was simultaneously the most considerate thing anyone had ever done for her, and also exactly the wrong thing. See, he was giving her an out. He was constructing a door and pointing at it, making it easy for her to walk through it, and the reason he was doing this was not because he wanted her to go. See, she was certain of that in the way she was certain of things she'd earned through evidence rather than assumption. See, he was doing it because he was afraid that what he wanted from her was more than he had the right to ask, and rather than ask for something he might not deserve, he was releasing her from the obligation of saying no. See, he was protecting her from a conversation he thought might be an imposition. See, he was wrong about that. Silas, she said. He looked at her then. See, if you want me to go, she said, I need you to look at me and tell me that directly. See, not through a door you've built to make it easier. See, look at me and tell me you want me to leave. The fire crackled. See, a log shifted. He looked at her. He didn't say it. See, the silence stretched out between them, full and serious and completely honest. See, and in that silence was everything that a winter of proximity and difficulty, and 2 children and 1 terrible fever night, and 100 small evenings by the fire had built between them, all of it present and undeniable. See, I can't, he said. His voice was rough at the edges, unpolished, a voice not doing any work to present itself as anything other than what it was. See, I can't tell you that. Then don't, she said. He looked at his hands. See, he looked at her. He looked like a man who had been alone inside something for a very long time and had just found a door in the wall he'd built and was not entirely sure what to do with the fact that it had a handle. See, I don't know what I can offer you, he said. This life isn't easy. See, the ridge, the winters, the work. I know that. I know what I'm asking would be. See, you haven't asked anything yet, she said. A beat. See, something moved across his face, not quite a smile, not quite anything she had a word for. See, no, he said, I haven't. He looked at her steadily. See, the decision visible in his face, moving from held back to forward, the specific moment when a man stops protecting himself long enough to be honest. See, stay, he said. Not for wages, not as he stopped. See, his jaw worked. Stay with us. As is mine, if you'd want that. See, the cabin was very quiet around those words. Outside, the mountain held its usual opinions about human arrangements, which was to say no opinions at all, utterly indifferent. See, inside, Eliza Mercer looked at Silas Rourke and thought about Boston and a cot in her sister's spare room and a leather bag thrown in the mud and $14 and a notebook full of plans. See, and she thought about Owen writing Papa cut wood today on brown paper and putting it in his pocket, and she thought about Clara holding a hawk feather with both hands. See, and she thought about a fever breaking at 5:15 in the morning and the sound of a man saying right here with no armor in it at all. See, she thought about what it had taken her to get to this room. See, the specific qualities that had been required, not strength, not exactly, but a kind of stubborn refusal to be only what circumstances suggested she should be. See, she thought about the woman she was becoming, which was different from the woman who'd stepped off that train in October in ways she was still discovering. See, yes, she said, one word. She meant all of it. Silas exhaled. See, the exhale of a man releasing something very large. See, he reached across the space between them, the literal physical space, the 18 inches of air between their chairs, and he put his hand over hers, on the mending she'd stopped pretending to work on. See, his hand was large and scarred and warm, in the way of hands that had spent years doing real work, and she turned her hand over and held it. See, neither of them moved for a while. The fire burned down slowly, and the mountain leaned into the walls, and outside the snow was doing its slow, reluctant retreat toward spring. See, and inside 2 adults sat by a fire, holding onto something they'd both spent longer than they should have, pretending they didn't want. See, the children are going to say something about this, she said eventually. See, Clara's going to be insufferable, he said. She did laugh then, actually laugh, because he was absolutely right. See, Owen will act like he knew the whole time, she said. See, he probably did, Silas said. He's been writing it in those sentences he thinks I don't know about. He paused. See, he wrote one in February, said something about Eliza staying. See, I found it on the workbench. She went quiet. You never said. See, I wasn't going to say it before you did, he said simply. See, she looked at him. He was looking at her in the way he'd started looking at her sometime around December and had never stopped, the kind of looking that had a whole conversation in it that his voice hadn't caught up to yet. See, we're going to have to tell them in the morning, she said. See, tomorrow morning soon enough, he said. She nodded. See, the fire was very low now. See, the room had the particular stillness of late night on the mountain, when everything outside had gone to whatever mountain things did in the dark, and the only sounds were internal, the small wooden sounds of a cabin settling. See, she should go to bed. She knew she should go to bed. Morning came early, and the children woke early, and the stove needed starting, and tomorrow was a full day. See, she didn't move. He didn't either. See, they sat in their chairs by the failing fire, hands connected across the small geography between them, and outside March was slowly, stubbornly, imperfectly beginning its work of making spring out of the wreckage of winter. See, which was, Eliza thought, approximately what everything worth having required. See, not a dramatic transformation, not a sudden clearing. See, just the slow, persistent, effortful work of a season changing into the next one, degree by degree, until one morning you woke up and the world was different, and you understood that it had been becoming different for a long time. See, and the only thing that had changed was that now you could see it. See, she held his hand. He held hers. Tomorrow they would tell the children, and Clara would be insufferable about it, and Owen would act like he'd known all along, which he probably had, and the Alderton children would start coming in 2 weeks. See, and the mountain would continue its long, indifferent business of being a mountain. And all of it, every bit of it, would be the work they had chosen. See, for the first time since she'd stepped off that train into the mud of a Montana platform, Eliza Mercer felt the specific, grounded certainty of a woman who knows exactly where she is and has decided that's where she intends to be. See, it felt like standing on solid ground. It felt like enough. See, they told the children the next morning. See, Eliza had been awake before the stove needed starting, which meant she'd been awake before 5. lying in the narrow bed in her room, listening to the mountain do its early morning work of settling into the cold and thinking about what the day held. See, not anxious exactly. Something closer to the feeling before a thing happens that you've decided you want, where the wanting and the waiting occupy the same space and you don't quite know what to do with either. See, she started the stove. She made coffee. See, she stood at the kitchen window with her cup and watched the sky go from black to gray to the particular pale that preceded actual light, and she thought about how differently she experienced this window than she had in October. See, in October, this window had shown her foreign country. See, now it showed her the south tree line and the wood pile and the fence post with the loose top rail that Silas kept saying he'd fix and kept not fixing, and all of it was simply the view from her window. See, hers. She had not noticed when that transition had happened. See, it had happened anyway. Silas came down at his usual time, not early, not late. See, he looked at her, and she looked at him, and there was a brief, private moment of adjustment, the first morning after adjustment, of people who have declared something the night before and are now inhabiting the daylight version of it, see, which is always slightly different from the firelight version and requires its own getting used to. See, he poured his coffee. He stood beside her at the window. See, they didn't touch, because touching in the morning light with the children about to come down was a different thing than holding hands by a dying fire. And they were both sensible enough to understand that. See, you still want to tell them this morning, he said. See, not a question exactly. Before I change my mind about how to say it, she said. See, he almost smiled. How are you going to say it? Directly, she said. See, the way I say everything. He nodded. That'll work better than anything I'd come up with. See, Owen came down first. As usual, he was constitutionally an early riser, up and functional in a way Clara absolutely was not, and he came into the kitchen in his socks because he always forgot his boots until he was already downstairs. See, and he poured himself a cup of the weak tea Eliza made for the children in the mornings, and he looked at both of them standing at the window with their coffee, and he said nothing, but his eyes made one small, careful trip between the two of them. See, he sat down at the table and picked up the almanac. See, Clara came down 12 minutes later, her hair not brushed, her face carrying the specific resistance of a child who has been pried from sleep before she was ready. See, she sat at the table, looked at the tea Eliza set in front of her, looked at the bread, looked at Owen, and apparently decided that consciousness was going to be unavoidable. See, Eliza sat down at the table. Silas remained standing near the stove in the way of a man who wants to be present but is leaving the talking to someone more qualified. See, I need to tell you both something, Eliza said. Owen looked up from the almanac. See, Clara wrapped both hands around her tea. Your father asked me last night to stay on, she said. See, not as your teacher, not as the person managing the cabin. See, as a permanent part of this family. She paused. See, she had decided that direct was right, and she was committed to it. See, we'd like to be married. If that's something you're both all right with. See, the silence at the table lasted approximately 4 seconds. See, Clara said, I knew it. Owen said, I knew it first. See, Clara turned on him with immediate and complete indignation. See, you did not, February, Owen said. I wrote it down. See, writing it down isn't knowing it, it's guessing it and writing it down. See, that's the same as. It is not the same. Children, Silas said, from his position near the stove, with the mild authority of a man who has refereed this particular dynamic for 6 years. See, they both stopped. He looked at them. Is that a yes? See, another small silence. Clara looked at Eliza with an expression that was, under its complexity, almost painfully legible. See, something that wanted very much to be all right, and was checking, one more time, that it actually was. See, are you going to try to be Mama? Clara asked. No, Eliza said. See, she'd expected this question. She'd been ready for it since October. See, I'm not going to try to be her. I'm going to be something else, something that doesn't have a name yet because it hasn't existed before. See, but it won't be that, and I won't pretend it is. Clara looked at her for a long moment. See, the calculation happening in a 7-year-old's face was more serious than most adults gave children credit for. See, okay, she said. Owen had gone back to the almanac with the air of someone whose position had been confirmed. See, I knew in February, he said, to no one in particular. See, you guessed in February, Clara said. Same thing, he said. See, Eliza looked at Silas over both their heads. See, he was looking back at her with an expression she had no single word for relief, probably, and something warmer than relief, and underneath both of those, something that was just quiet and steady and real. See, he nodded once slightly. She nodded back. Clara drank her tea. See, Owen turned a page. The morning proceeded. That was the thing about the cabin, by then it proceeded. See, the machinery of it was established and running, and could absorb a significant announcement without derailing, which was itself evidence of something. See, of how far they'd come from the first weeks, when the whole enterprise had felt like something being held together with stubbornness and good intentions, and not much else. See, the weeks that followed were the beginning of spring, in the particular way that spring began on that ridge, which was to say, reluctantly, impermanently, with constant reversals. See, March would give them 3 days of actual warmth, and then slam them back into conditions that felt like January, and then relent again, and the snow would retreat 6 inches and return 4. See, and the mud the retreat left behind was its own kind of difficulty. See, but the direction was set. The mountain was releasing the winter. See, even mountains had to do that eventually. The Alderton children started coming in late March. See, Mrs. Alderton brought them the first time herself, driving a wagon that had seen better years with 4 children ranged along the back like birds on a fence, smallest to largest. See, she was a spare, practical woman in her 40s, who shook Eliza's hand at the cabin door and looked around the interior with an expression of quick, thorough assessment, and then said, "See, you've got this organized well, with the appreciation of a woman who understood what organization in a mountain cabin cost in terms of daily effort." See, the children were Jonah, who was 10, and had the resigned expression of the oldest child who has long accepted that his purpose in life is to look after the others. Ruth, 8, see, who was missing a front tooth and appeared to be the family's primary opinion holder. Thomas, 6, who latched onto Owen within approximately 4 minutes with the intensity of someone who had been waiting specifically for Owen his entire life. See, and the youngest, Maddie, who was 5 and sat in the corner for most of the first morning quietly watching everything with eyes the size of quarters. See, Clara, confronted with Ruth's immediate and considerable opinions about how things should be arranged, took approximately 7 minutes to decide that Ruth was acceptable. See, Eliza watched Thomas and Owen disappear into a corner with the almanac, and felt something in her chest that she'd stopped trying to name accurately and had started simply letting be there. See, Mrs. Alderton stayed for an hour before driving back. See, at the door she turned to Eliza and said quietly, the oldest one, Jonah. See, he's been trying to teach the others himself since their teacher left 2 winters ago. See, he's running out of what he knows. I'll work with him separately, Eliza said. See, he's old enough for different materials. Mrs. Alderton looked at her for a moment. See, you've done this before. Not exactly like this, Eliza said. See, but close enough. The older woman nodded. She climbed back on her wagon and clicked her horse forward, and Eliza went back inside to find 7 children in various stages of learning, arguing, and mild territorial negotiation. See, and she stood in the doorway of her kitchen that was also a school and felt something she hadn't felt since before she'd left Boston, that her life was the right size for her. See, not too small and not beyond her. The right size. By April, Jonah Alderton was reading beyond anything Eliza had initially given him credit for. See, and the problem she'd been quietly worried about, that she'd run out of material fast enough to challenge him, resolved itself when she gave him the legal statutes book, half ironically, see, and discovered that he read it with complete seriousness, and came back the following session with 3 specific questions about territorial land claims that she couldn't fully answer and had to think about carefully. See, she wrote to someone in Redstone Crossing that month. See, not Bellamy. A woman named Mrs. Firth, who ran a small dry goods concern and was, by general reputation, the person you contacted when you needed something done that required knowledge of what was actually available in town. See, Eliza wrote asking about the availability of proper school primers, arithmetic texts, and possibly if they existed anywhere in the territory readers appropriate for older children. See, she enclosed money from her wages. the wages she'd saved because there was nothing to spend them on all winter, and asked Mrs. Firth to send what she could find. 3 weeks later, a package arrived with the monthly mail, wrapped in brown paper and string, containing 2 primers, 1 arithmetic text, and a novel, not a school text, just a novel, a good one with a note from Mrs. Firth that said simply, "Heard there's a school starting." Good. Someone should. Eliza put the novel on the shelf next to the almanac and the legal statutes. That evening Owen asked what it was. She told him it was a story. He asked if she'd read it. She said not yet. He asked if she'd read it out loud when she did. She said yes. "Clara, from across the room, I want to hear it too." Obviously, Owen said. Spring opened the pass in the 2nd week of April, which was earlier than usual according to Silas, who tracked these things against some internal record built from years of living on the ridge. The snow on the main track down to Redstone Crossing receded enough for a careful wagon journey, and Silas said they needed to go down for supplies proper spring restocking. The serious list, and Eliza said she'd come. And both children said they were coming, and that was apparently that. She had not thought carefully about what going back to Redstone Crossing would mean. She had thought about it the way you think about something you'd rather not examine, which is to say she'd registered it and filed it and returned to more pressing concerns. And now, the morning of the trip arrived, and she was sitting on the wagon seat next to Silas with the twins in the back and the road unwinding down the mountain, and she was thinking about it. Not with dread. Something more complicated than dread. Something that had dread in it, but also other things, a quiet, settled anger that she'd thought was resolved and had apparently only been dormant. And underneath that, a clarity about herself that she hadn't had in October, which was new and real and worth something. Redstone Crossing looked the same. That was always the strange thing about returning to a place where something significant had happened to you, the place itself didn't know. The platform was the same platform. The street was the same street with the same mud. The buildings were the same buildings, slightly more weathered, a fresh coat of paint on one that hadn't had it in October. Bellamy's general store occupied the same corner it always had. The sign was the same sign. Silas pulled the wagon up and helped the children down, and she climbed down herself and stood in the street and looked at the store and made a decision. "I'm going in," she said. Silas looked at the store and then at her. "I know," he said. "I'll take the children to get the hardware supplies." "Give you a few minutes." She looked at him. "You knew I'd want to go in." "You've been getting ready to go in since we left the cabin," he said. She looked at him a beat longer. Then she turned and crossed the street and pushed open the door to Bellamy's store. The bell above the door was the same bell. Horace Bellamy was behind the counter, doing what shopkeepers do when no customer requires them some combination of organizing and accounting, and occupying himself with the appearance of industry. He looked up when the bell rang. He looked at her. He did not recognize her immediately. That landed differently than she'd expected. She'd prepared herself for recognition and its attendant discomfort, and the absence of it the 2 or 3 seconds during which she was simply a customer. Not the woman he'd humiliated on the platform 6 months ago was something she hadn't anticipated. It made the moment feel briefly like someone else's story. Then he recognized her. She watched it happen. The small recalibration of his features, the way his eyes made a second pass over her, not the assessing inventory look of October, but the look of a man trying to reconcile what he's seeing with what he remembers, and finding a gap he can't immediately close. She looked different. She knew she looked different. She'd seen it in the small mirror in her room, the weathering, the posture that had shifted, the hands that were no longer a seamstress's hands. But more than the physical changes, and she understood this, even if he couldn't have articulated it, she occupied space differently. She stood in his store the way she stood in her kitchen, like someone who knew exactly where she was and had decided it was fine. Miss Mercer, he said. He'd remembered her name, which surprised her slightly. Mrs. Rourke, she said. It was the first time she'd said it aloud. It sat in the air between them, with a weight she hadn't fully anticipated. Something moved in his face. Not shame, she didn't think Horace Bellamy was built for shame in the uncomplicated way, but something adjacent to it, a discomfort that was the closest he could get. See, you stayed on then, he said, with Rourke. I married him, she said. See, 3 weeks ago. She looked around the store with the calm, specific interest of a woman doing her shopping. See, I need flour, coffee, see, dried bean, see, 2 pounds of salt, see, and cornmeal, see, and if you have lamp oil, that too. He moved to fill the order. See, he was doing it carefully, with more care than was strictly necessary. The care of a man who is aware he is being watched and doesn't want to do anything that could be held against him. See, she let him fill the order in silence for a moment. See, then she said, not harshly, not with performance, just as a plain statement of something true, you decided I wasn't worth keeping alive through winter. See, in front of 40 people, see, you decided that, see, and you said it out loud, see, and you dropped my bag in the mud, see. He stopped with his hand on the cornmeal sack. I'm telling you this not because I want an apology, she said. See, I don't need one. I'm telling you because I want you to understand what you were actually measuring that day on the platform. See, you thought you were measuring my usefulness. What you were actually measuring was your own judgment, and your judgment was wrong. She said this without heat, without drama, the way you state a fact that is simply true. See, I'm not fragile. I never was. You just couldn't see past what I looked like long enough to notice what I was. See, he set the cornmeal on the counter. His face was doing something complicated and controlled. See, Rourke saw it, she said, in about 9 minutes. See, on the same platform, with the same woman, on the same day. See, I'm pointing that out not to make you feel worse, but because there's a lesson in it that might be worth knowing. She paused. See, some things that look like weakness are just quiet. See, and quiet is not the same as nothing. He looked at her for a moment. See, the store was empty of other customers, for which she was privately grateful because this conversation was between them and didn't need an audience. See, he tallied her order. He told her the amount. See, his voice was careful and flat. She paid, exact change, which she'd counted out on the wagon. See, thank you, she said, and she meant it as a transaction, not a grace. See, she picked up the parcels and she turned toward the door. See, and then the door opened and Silas came in, and behind Silas came Owen and Clara. See, she had not orchestrated this. She was certain she had not, because she hadn't known when they'd be done with the hardware, and she hadn't planned the timing. See, it simply happened, the way some things simply happen, with the accidental perfection that life occasionally produces without anyone's intention. See, Silas stopped when he saw her. He read her face quickly and completely. He'd gotten good at that over the winter, and he crossed to her and stood beside her. See, and Owen and Clara came in behind him and stood where they always stood when they were in any kind of unfamiliar indoor space, which was close enough to an adult to feel the warmth of them. See, Clara was holding the hawk feather. See, Eliza didn't know why she'd brought it. She'd probably just been carrying it the way she carried things she'd decided belonged to her, but she was holding it in her right hand the way she'd held it on the windowsill, two-handed and attentive. See, she looked at Bellamy. He looked at all 4 of them. See, whatever the expression was that crossed his face, in that moment, she didn't watch it long enough to fully catalog it. It was not the expression of a man confirmed in his prior assessment. See, it was the expression of a man confronted, without any particular cruelty, with the concrete evidence of what his judgment had failed to see. See, he'd looked at a woman on a platform and seen the end of her usefulness. See, what was standing in his store was not what he'd predicted. See, Silas put his hand lightly at the small of her back. See, just there, just briefly, the specific weight of it. See, she felt it and didn't say anything about it. Owen looked at Bellamy with the frank, uncommitted assessment of a 7-year-old boy who has not been told to have feelings about this man, and is therefore simply looking at him. See, Clara was still examining the hawk feather. Ready? Silas said to her. See, yes, she said. They left. The bell above the door rang as they went out. Same bell, same sound, different people walking through it. See, on the street, Owen looked up at her and said, "Who was that?" See, "Someone I used to know briefly," she said. "Did you like him?" See, "No," she said. Owen nodded with the equanimity of a child who considers this sufficient information. See, Clara said. The store smelled funny. "Turpentine," Silas said. See, He keeps it near the door. Can we get something to eat? Clara asked. See, and just like that it was over. See, Eliza had thought about that encounter for 6 months, had carried it in some form since the morning it happened, and it was over in the time it took Clara to decide she was hungry, and the extraordinary thing was that it felt complete. See, not triumphant, not dramatic, just complete, like a sentence that has finally gotten its period. See, they ate at a small establishment 2 streets from Bellamy's, a lunch counter run by a large woman named Mrs. See, Spence, who brought them bowls of beef stew without being asked, and then came back with bread, and then looked at Owen eating with the focused intensity he brought to all his meals, and brought him a second bowl, see, unprompted, while he was still working through the first. See, growing boy, she told Silas, as though this required confirmation. See, he is, Silas agreed. Clara ate more slowly than Owen, because Clara was looking around at the people in the lunch counter with the interested sociological attention she brought to groups of more than 3 humans. See, she leaned over to Eliza at one point and whispered, "That woman over there has the same hat that was in the trunk in the attic." See, Eliza looked at the woman. She looked at the hat. "You're right," she whispered back. See, Clara looked satisfied and went back to her stew. Silas was watching this exchange with an expression that was the full version of the almost smiles, which meant it was actually a smile, real and unguarded, and Eliza saw it and thought, there it is. See, that's what that looks like when nothing's holding it back. See, it looked like enough to build a life around. See, they loaded the wagon with the supplies and started back up the mountain in the early afternoon. The road still muddy from the snowmelt, but passable. The horses less resistant going uphill than they ever were going down. See, which was one of the mountain's many counterintuitive qualities. See, the children were in the back with the supplies. See, Owen apparently reading something he'd found in one of the parcels he'd been asking for weeks for proper books, and she'd included one without making a thing of it, and Clara watching the trees with the kind of alert, see, proprietary attention of a person looking at something that belongs to them. See, Eliza sat on the wagon seat and watched the mountain come back up around them, the way it always came back up, folding them in as the road climbed, and she thought about what it had looked like the first time she'd made this trip in October. See, foreign country, unknown terrain, 12 miles from anything she recognized. See, she knew every bend of this road now. See, she knew where it narrowed and where the left wheel had a tendency to drop and where the view opened briefly through the trees on the eastern side and where the frost came earliest in the mornings because of how the shadows fell. See, she knew it the way you know something you've moved through repeatedly without deciding to memorize it, the knowledge that just accumulates in your body from being somewhere over and over until it's simply yours. See, Silas drove in his usual silence, but a different quality of silence than the October version. See, less like a door shut from the inside, more like the silence of a person who is simply content to be in the present moment without needing to fill it. See, what are you thinking about? He asked her. Not quite out of nowhere, he'd been watching her from the corner of his eye for the last 10 minutes. See, the first time we made this drive, she said, October. See, yes, she paused. You said the mountain destroys people who underestimate it. See, it does. I thought about that for weeks, she said. See, I kept waiting to understand whether I was underestimating it. She looked at the trees moving past. See, I don't think I was. I just didn't know what I was estimating. See, he turned this over. And now? Now I know what I'm estimating, she said. See, he nodded. He looked at the road. After a moment, he said, You never told me what you thought when I asked you to come. See, that day on the platform. What actually made you decide? See, she considered this honestly. You told me Owen used to be the loud one, she said. See, and that Clara had a big laugh. You told me those things in the past tense. See, and I thought someone who talks about his children's joy in the past tense and sounds that sad about it isn't someone who doesn't love them. See, he's someone who's lost and doesn't know how to find his way back. She paused. See, I thought maybe I could help with that. See, the road bent around a granite outcropping they'd named. Between the two of them, without ever agreeing on the name, the gray one she'd called it that once, and he'd used it the next day without comment, and it had stuck. See, could you? He said. She thought about Owen coming downstairs one morning in January, before anyone was up, and reading labels off the pantry shelves in the early dark just for himself, just because reading was something he could do now, running his finger under each word with the particular satisfaction of a child who has acquired something real. She thought about Clara and the hawk feather and the numbers problem that had made her face open up like a window. She thought about the morning after the fever, when Owen had slid down the wall in the night and ended up on the floor with his sister's hand still in his. I think we helped each other, she said. He reached over and put his hand briefly over hers. The same gesture as the night before in the store, different context, same weight. She turned her palm up and held it for a moment, and then he needed both hands for the road, and that was fine. From the back of the wagon, without looking up from his book, Owen said, "You're doing that thing where you hold hands." "Mind your reading," Silas said. "I can read and observe at the same time," Owen said. Clara, I told him you'd do that. You told me in March, Owen said. I told you in February. Being first isn't the same as being right, Clara said, which was a sentence that surprised Eliza enough that she almost turned around to look at her. Because it was the kind of sentence that appeared in people's mouths after they'd been thinking about something longer than they'd let on. The cabin appeared through the trees, as it always did, not gradually, but suddenly, as if it had been waiting just around the last bend to be there. Solid. Real. The woodpile along the south wall, the barn with the door Silas had been meaning to rehinge. For 2 months, the cleared yard where the muddy ruts of the winter were starting to dry in the April sun. Eliza looked at it. She'd looked at it 100 times from this angle, coming back from the well or the barn or the woodpile, and she had never quite had the same experience of it twice. But this time, coming back up the mountain from Redstone Crossing, from Bellamy's store and the lunch counter and the encounter that had put a period on something. She looked at the cabin and had the specific experience of looking at a thing that is yours. Not owned. Not in the legal or financial sense, though Silas had said they'd register the homestead jointly, and she'd said that was fine. She wasn't thinking about that right now. Yours in the sense of built into you. Yours in the sense of the place your body goes to when it's tired, the place your mind returns to when it wanders, the place that exists in your chest as a location even when you're somewhere else. She had that. She had not had it before this. May came, and the mountain became something new, which it did every May, with the specific generosity of a landscape releasing what it had been holding since October. Things grew. The clearing around the cabin, which had been a snow-covered expanse, and then a mud field, and then a dried mud field, became something green and various. Silas named some of the plants for her when she asked. She noted them in the notebook. She was using the notebook differently, by then not recording, not inventorying, not the nervous accounting of a woman keeping track of her position. Just writing, the way you write when you have something to say and no particular audience. She wrote about the children a lot. She wrote about Owen, the morning he finished the novel she'd ordered from Mrs. Firth, how he'd turned the last page and sat for 3 full minutes not moving, the book open on his lap, somewhere inside the story still, and then looked up at her and said, "Can you get more of these?" With an urgency that made her want to go immediately to Redstone Crossing and empty Mrs. Firth's entire inventory. She wrote about Clara's numbers, which had outpaced everything Eliza could provide without better materials. And about the letter she'd written to a school in Helena asking about more advanced arithmetic texts, and receiving back not just a text, but a brief, interested reply from the schoolmaster there, a man named Hargrove, who had apparently heard through some territorial network that there was a school operating on a ridge 12 miles above Redstone Crossing, and who wrote to say this was exactly the kind of thing the territory needed more of. She wrote about Jonah Alderton, who had, by May, read through the legal statutes and the almanac and the novel, and was asking questions about history that she could only partially answer, and who, she'd begun to suspect, was the kind of mind that required more than she was equipped to provide, and who deserved to know that about himself. She told him on a Wednesday afternoon in late May, directly, in the way she did everything, "I think you need more than what I can give you here." See, I think you're the kind of person who needs a proper institution eventually. See, that's not a criticism, it's just true, and I think you should know it. See, Jonah Alderton looked at her with the careful expression of someone who has been told something they already suspected and didn't know anyone else had noticed. See, my mother can't afford to send me anywhere, he said. See, not now, she said, but things change, and people who know the right things are better positioned for when they do. She paused. See, keep going at the rate you're going, and by the time you're 16, there will be options that don't exist right now. See, I'll write you the best recommendation anyone in this territory could give you. See, he looked at her steadily. Why? Because you're worth it, she said. See, and because someone told me once, without knowing they were telling me, that the thing someone sees in you that other people miss is worth more than the opinion of the people who miss it. See, he didn't fully understand that. He was 12, but he filed it away. She could see him filing it, the way serious children file things for later. See, the wedding had been a small, practical affair. In late March, a circuit preacher who passed through every few weeks had done the formal part, with Owen and Clara as the only witnesses, which was exactly right. See, with no fuss and no ceremony beyond what was necessary, because neither of them was built for fuss, and neither of them needed the ceremony to know what it meant. See, Eliza wore her best dress, which had been her second best dress in Boston, and was now her best dress because her best Boston dress had been ruined by November. See, Silas wore his good coat. Afterward, Clara had announced that they should have cake, and because no one had prepared cake, she and Eliza made one together that afternoon with the last of the good sugar, and it was slightly lopsided and extremely good. See, and Owen ate 2 pieces and claimed he'd only had one, which fooled no one. See, Silas ate his piece of cake at the table and watched his family. The word had arrived naturally, without drama. It was simply the correct word and said nothing, because he was Silas, and some things he experienced only had to be felt, not spoken. See, but that evening, after the children were in bed and the fire was banked and she was writing in her notebook, he said from his chair, "I want to tell you something." See, she looked up. "I was ready to stop," he said, "before you came." See, not I wasn't going to do anything. But I'd stopped expecting anything to get better. See, I was just keeping things going. For them. He looked at the fire. See, that's not the same as living. I know that now. I didn't entirely know it then. He paused. See, you brought it back. Not by doing anything large. See, just by being present in a particular way. Like someone who expected things to matter. See, she held this. Things do matter, she said. I know that now, he said. See, you reminded me. She looked at him across their chairs, across the geography that was no longer 18 inches of uncertain space, but the familiar distance of 2 people who knew each other well enough to be quiet together. See, you reminded me of some things too, she said. If we're making confessions. See, like what? That there are people who see past the surface, she said. See, I'd started to think that was rare enough to be almost mythological. See, Bellamy had a lot of company in my history. People who decided what I was before I'd had a chance to demonstrate it. She paused. See, you didn't do that. 9 minutes, he said. Platform. See, 9 minutes, she agreed, but you looked. He nodded. See, he looked at the fire. I almost didn't. I almost walked past. Something complicated moved through his expression. See, I'd talked myself out of asking anyone else after the second caretaker left. See, I was standing there watching Bellamy walk away from you, and I thought, don't. See, don't get involved. You've got enough. And then you sat down and opened your notebook. See, she waited. That was it, he said. I'd never seen anyone do that. See, just respond to something that bad by immediately starting to plan. See, no paused, looking for the word. No collapse. See, no performance. See, just all right. See, what are the facts? See, what do I have? See, what do I do next? See, it's how I handle things, she said. I know, I watched you do it all winter. He looked at her. See, it's how you're built, and I needed someone built like that. See, not because stopped, restarted. Not because I needed a caretaker. See, I needed someone who didn't quit when it was hard. See, and you never did. She thought about the nights she'd been afraid. See, the fever night, yes, but also the small fears, the fear in the first weeks that she'd miscalculated. See, that she'd climb this mountain and fail at everything that mattered and be sent back down it with nothing to show but harder hands and emptier pockets. See, she'd felt those fears. She'd done the work anyway. See, I thought about quitting, she said honestly. I want you to know that. See, there were mornings I thought about it. I know, he said. See, I could tell. She looked at him. You could tell? See, some mornings you'd be at that window before the stove was started, just looking at the road down. He said it without accusation. See, just information. I'd come downstairs and see you there, and I'd think, today might be the day she decides. See, you never said anything. It wasn't my place to say anything, he said. See, you were there because you chose to be. If you stopped choosing it, that was your choice to make. He paused. See, but every morning you turned away from the window and started the stove. See, she thought about those mornings, the specific quality of them, the cold, the doubt, the window, showing the road that went down to a world where things were less hard. See, the road looked very clear on those mornings, she said. See, I imagine it did, he said. But the stove needed starting, she said. See, he almost smiled. Yeah, she looked at the fire, and the children needed breakfast. See, and there were labels on the pantry jars, and you'd left coffee on the stove. She paused. See, small things. I kept making the same small choice, and then the next day I'd make it again, and then I'd stopped having to make it because it had stopped being a question. See, she closed the notebook. That's probably what most things are, she said. See, not one big decision, just the same small one, made over and over until it's just who you are. See, he looked at her for a long moment. The fire did its amber work on his face. See, outside, May was doing what May did on the mountain, which was a different thing entirely from what it had been doing 6 months ago, but it was still the mountain, still the ridge, still the same 12 miles of switchbacked road. See, I'm glad you kept starting the stove, he said. So am I, she said. See, outside, the night was mild for once, not cold, not a night that pressed against the walls with the hostility of January or the indifference of February. See, a soft night, a night in which the mountain was simply there, doing what it always did, which was exist without reference to any of them, enormous and permanent and completely unmoved by what happened inside the cabins. See, but inside the cabin on the Rourke homestead, which was also the Mercer Rourke homestead now, and would be registered as such when they got to it, because there was always something to get to inside that cabin. See, the fire was going, and the children were asleep, and 2 people who had started as a desperate bargain on a train platform in October were sitting in their chairs at the end of a day that had been real and imperfect and full of, see, the ordinary business of a life being actually lived. See, the following October brought another winter. The mountain delivered it the same way it always had, without preparation or apology, full force. See, but the woodpile was stacked higher than the previous year. See, the chinking in the north wall was solid. The pantry was stocked with Eliza's particular methodical abundance, enough of everything, margins of safety built in, nothing left to chance that could be anticipated. See, the children's room had proper school texts now, and books, real books, a small shelf of them, including 3 novels, because Owen had made his position on novels abundantly clear. See, Mrs. Alderton's children arrived twice a week. Jonah now tall enough that he had to duck the low beam in the doorway, his questions getting larger and harder and better every month. See, a family from further up the ridge, the Coulters, see, who'd lost their barn to fire. In September came down one afternoon in November, and Silas offered them the use of the secondary structure behind the barn for winter storage, and they stayed for supper, and the children played cards together until it, see, was too late for the Coulters to safely make it back up in the dark. So they stayed the night, and Eliza made breakfast for 11 people the next morning, see, which required every pot she owned and some improvisation, and was chaotic and loud and genuine. See, word traveled on ridges. By December, there was a loose, informal understanding in the surrounding homesteads, nothing official, nothing decreed that the Rourke place was a place you could come to if you were stuck. See, if the weather turned on you on the road, if a child was sick and you couldn't get the circuit doctor for a week, and you needed someone who'd seen it before and knew what to do. See, if you'd been alone too long on your own ridge and needed, simply and essentially, to be somewhere that felt like people. See, Eliza had not planned any of this. She had planned to survive a winter. See, she had planned to do the work well enough to earn what she'd been promised and leave in spring with $60 and the beginnings of something to build on. See, instead, she had built it here. Without noticing the exact moment when she'd stopped building toward somewhere else and had started building right where she stood. See, she wrote in her notebook on the first real snow night of the second winter. While the fire burned and Silas read the almanac, and Owen and Clara were upstairs not quite asleep. See, their voices coming through the floor in the low murmur of twins, telling each other things too private for the general household. See, a home is not the place that takes you in. I understand that now. See, a home is the place you make strong enough to take other people in. See, the strength is the point. The work is the point, not the arriving. See, I came here with $14 and a muddy bag and a notebook full of plans. See, I was planning to belong to someone else's life until I could afford my own. See, I ended up building one. She looked at the notebook page. See, she thought about Horace Bellamy, briefly, the way you think about something that no longer has power over you, with a kind of distant, factual acknowledgement. See, he'd told her she wasn't worth keeping alive through a Montana winter. See, he'd said it publicly, and he'd meant it. He'd been measuring the wrong thing. See, that was the whole of it. He'd looked at what she appeared to be and mistaken appearance for fact, and that was his error to carry, not hers. See, what Silas had seen in 9 minutes on a platform, what the children had discovered over months of mornings and lessons, and one terrible fever night, what she had discovered about herself in the doing of it. See, none of that had been visible to Bellamy, because Bellamy hadn't looked past the surface. See, some people never do. That was the truth of it. Some people looked at you and decided in a second what you were, and no amount of evidence moved them after that. See, the cruelty was real, the wound was real, but the wound healed in proportion to what you built after it, and Eliza had built considerably. See, the fire settled. Silas looked up from the almanac. See, he looked at her with the particular quality of looking he'd developed, not intense, just present, attentive. The look of a man who actually wanted to know what was happening in the face he was looking at. See, what, he said. Nothing, she said, just thinking. See, good thoughts. She looked at the cabin around her. See, at the hawk feathers still on the windowsill. At wood on the wood box in Clara's handwriting, the corrected version that she'd corrected herself. See, at the row of books and the school texts and the primers and the one novel with the cracked spine from being read too many times. See, at her husband in his chair, the almanac on his knee, the lamp making everything warm. See, yes, she said. Good thoughts. Outside, the mountain pressed the cold against the walls. Inside, everything held.